questions we ask every so often, and then once we hit a threshold, then that comes up for review.
Let me ask about the every so often, or are we thinking about some kind of a cycle where annually we do this evaluation, which shouldn't take that long, and
right.
we prioritize based on that?
And maybe every other year we just go through.
That's part of
you
the
guys can
decision
determine
here
the
is do we want
frequency of
this
that.
to be yearly?
Yeah, I just wondered what's
Yeah.
I think would be reasonable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at the health standards, would it make sense to do this next year? Just because you just passed them, right? Like, would it be valuable to do this again next year? Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. There's any times where we roll out standards, there's things that are like, oh. That kind of thing. So.
I'm also thinking, is there a review of performance in place? And maybe that would be at more of the audit, right? To make sure, because we can't verify right now, as was laid out yesterday with Board Member Bolter, we don't know how the teachers are implementing the standards and if they're being used and which ones are being skipped over or all of that. So, and that's my concern with the math standards.
But
right?
in tested subjects, they are measured through that.
Yeah, but I don't think that's enough because because of the opt out, which I fully support. I'm not going to withdraw that support, but for the educator standpoint, are they implementing the standards correctly? Are they, is the curriculum that they're using, in line with our standards? So that, anyways, so that's another thought. When you see the 10-year spread out, I'm like, okay, but what about those parents who say this isn't working, in year 3 or in year 4, right? We've had the math standards since 2009, and the ELA standards since 2009. Yes, I know there was a tiny bit of revision in math, but not enough to what I was wanting to have done. So didn't we see a paper that said that a parent could trigger it, or
yes,
or a board member could trigger a review, or all of that?
We did talk about that, and I'm wondering, to answer your questions, when you look at what's been placed before us in board docs, does that get at what you're getting at? Because I think there is.
You could layer these.
You could, yes. And there could be layers.
Kind of like the cycle. And then the layer would be, if it seems like there's a call from the field, then we would respond by filling out that form, or we already filled it out, that kind of thing. So you could layer the impacts. You could still have a national that's coming, but also a way for the field to predict the likelihood of what's coming.
True. But I also want to be talking to the hotline, because I never have a hotline call currently about standards. So how do we jump on that? How do we
An application would that be like that would be right.
Probably all of them. Like I'm ELA.
Yeah.
There's some people calling, some people not calling, right? I probably haven't gotten any hotline calls. ELA is not a very complicated.
Well, the student advisory board wants the ELA.
We're making it work hard.
No, they're going to make that work.
I just think we could have those triggers in there in place. I mean, I'm getting a sense, and you guys jump in, that is this where I like where this is heading, but I feel like we need more. We need like a weighting system. We need.
Do you have it now?
Yeah. So I went through and did a little research. I contacted National State and they gave me a rundown of the states in terms of what they had, what they do. And it looks like the most often any state revises things is on a 3-year cycle. And then it goes, the longest any state takes is 10 years. I'll give you that just for fun. And then they sent me some information about how specific states handle their revisions. So I read through these, and sure. And I thought, after looking it all over, that what we've been doing in terms of this 10-step process and getting public input and that kind of things, it seems like to me, in my opinion, Utah seemed to be superior in how they were handling things to these, at least these that I reviewed.
So I think that's very good for us. Then I also went back to the 2014 law that was passed and reviewed that, and saw that we have several places where this calls for a standards review. And on the core revision timeline, we have even more areas that are included, such as world languages and library media and driver's ed. And so I guess looking at all those things, I think, well, maybe not all standards are created equal, and some might need a look at revising more often and than others, and maybe particularly those that are assessed, so we have some kind of feedback on how well our students are doing with those standards.
I think that's why I love this, because that builds into like standards that need to be reviewed more often. Like look at, outdated standards, things like that.
So maybe rather than just simplistically doing 1 year over a process of 10 years, we could do some layering with those that are more critically important to us, and then others that it's nice to have standards and to keep up with them.
Janet, does the option that's in there, does that work for what you're getting at?
Okay, show me where the option is.
So in board docs, it would be...
yes, and you're recommending we put some kind of a numerical guideline on there to trigger.
And I'm okay with anything. I just feel like I like to visually see it, because you can kind of see, these standards, alert, there's a lot of red. But I just think so that it could be really clear, we have some sort of trigger number, or we figure something out. And I think we could assign Jennifer to do that fancy thing. If you guys, unless you guys, Scott, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I
the
think
state data would be helpful with what other people do, and the frequency around assessment.
And it's not an emergency, like we can do this right. Like we can send it back and have you...
Yeah, there's no,
like you're not going to be mad at us, right?
At this point that I'm aware of.
Okay.
So, we've got to get our science through, and then we've done all the other ones within a decade at least. So we at least have, other than social studies has been 19 years, I think. So that will be potentially your next one. We do need a system. So
we do. I just want to do this.
But,
and Scott, you were going to add something?
Yeah, I think we're on the right track with
this.
There's certainly going to be some kind of a non-quantitative analysis where we look at it, and somebody's going to have to assign the numbers, but we can make it so there's little decisions instead of a big decision, looking at colors, saying this one's a 10. I think we've got to be careful not to make this too burdensome.
Right.
This evaluation process needs to be something that you can handle fairly quickly and easily, so we can do it fairly frequently and not have each one of these take 3 or 4 months. I'm really concerned about the amount of time it takes between when we trigger, we want to do this standard, to when we actually issue the standard, and I think maybe that's something we ought to look at as well.
So what is it? It's a year. We say we're going to do this, and then we have a year to work before other things happen.
Well, go ahead, Darren, will you comment on that?
Yeah, so it's going to be longer than that, especially with the changes that are recently made. And Ricky could probably address that, because he's got the next ones that are coming out from the time that the task was assigned, Ricky, to when the earliest they could possibly be implemented in the field is how many years?
So from adoption to implementation, is that what you're saying?
From when you're identified that we're going to review the science and change those, and just go step 1, right?
So step 1 was I think it was October or November 2017.
Wow.
Yeah. We're now looking, and we'll look at this in a bit, with the changes that were just made, we're now looking probably September, October of this year before we're finally finished.
For 19, so.
Which comes with implementation.
Yeah,
which we might
push implementation back actually the entire year.
So help with some.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I just wanted to make a comment. I think since it does take such a long time, the thing that's been concerning me since I was out and about campaigning this year is a lot of teachers came to me and said these standards are, specifically the ELA standards, they felt like needed to be redone. And I had 5 or 6 English teachers come up and tell me, which I felt like that was quite a few. I think that they should have, they're in the trenches. They know when they feel like they need to be redone. I think that we need to have something that triggers maybe a survey of teachers in that area so that they can give us their input as well. And then that they should have some pretty good say into when it needs to be done as well.
Where would that be in this document? Is there a place?
I don't think so. So what I'm thinking is that
maybe it's under academic.
We could even, I mean, there's a couple ways you could do it. One, you could just go to the curriculum directors and have them weigh in every year. What standards do they feel might be need? You could do a teacher survey. We don't get great responses on
I feel like it would need to be in here, though, to keep it.
Yeah,
I don't want to have too many more questions, but yeah.
Potentially.
Well, this under academic factors,
I feel like you could put it under academic.
I see on
like,
the,
is there a district, teacher, etc.
The notes that we did for this social studies one, he says surveys of teachers and LEA leaders support this, so he's already.
Oh, okay. In the example.
Because he's done some work on that, but that was personal work. But if we want to make that more of a standard protocol,
but that looks like the place.
We could survey the field and then get a feel of. Once we hit a certain percentage of people that think it's time. I mean, ELA's been almost a decade since we truly adopted, so.
And I would even say, maybe beyond time, but what are we missing? What was added? What are you seeing because of implementation that we took out that we weren't really paying attention? I don't know. Just what is missing?
You kind of need a quick review process versus a long,
versus
an overhaul. So that's something we really don't have right now. It turns into an overhaul every time.
We need
this needs to be simple
a little
and clear, and then you get into complications. So I don't know if you guys are having a consensus, or if there's a motion or something you want to direct. Do you want to go ahead?
Go ahead.
I'd make a motion that we direct staff to continue working on the standards revision and review document that was presented today. Specifically, look at providing some kind of a numerical measurement, quantitative, with some weighting for the various areas, and also specific requests for teacher input or LEA input. I don't know how specific we want to be there, but teacher input. Maybe under academic factors. So that would be the motion.
Okay, so the motion before the committee is to direct staff to continue with the standards review rubric and maybe adding a weighting system, information about teacher input. You got it down, right, Jennifer? Norley, did you get that? Okay, so it was teacher input and scoring and weighting.
I would also add.
Okay, is there discussion to that?
Yes, if I may. Just add an interim review, right?
What do you mean by interim?
Halfway through the 10-year span that you go back and look at the performance of the standards. Are they doing what we've said they're doing? Are teachers implementing them correctly? Instead of we're not waiting till the 10 years to go, we didn't do what we were supposed to
Jennifer, let me clarify. I think the intent of this is to periodically review. Even if standards are good, we just have a check. And I think maybe we need, as part of that, Scott's motion, I think we need to how often do we just do a whatever, you got that.
Yeah, and that's where I think that looking at these other states, maybe coming back to some data around the frequency that they're doing. 10 years, that's where ELA's almost at. I truly do believe we're running. It's been 10 years.
We are.
We have too many standards. We need to reduce to
we need to
one
reduce.
of the big rocks. And I think that's what the research is doing right now. You're better off to do a focus and let people add what they need. But we were responsive with the ELA in 2013 before I came to add handwriting because the field called for it. I'm not sure what that process looked like, but it did happen, and that was a tweak that the field said, these are insufficient, we need this added, and it happened. So we almost need the opportunity for a quick tweak versus an overhaul.
Yeah, and I want this to be quick so that we don't wait so long. Janet?
And another thought I've had, so Ricky's starting in October of 2017, and we'll be implementing in 2020.
Yeah, it really just depends. So
you want to come to the table? If you want.
Come on up.
I love coming to the table. Wow. I don't know where to sit, though. I feel really far away over here.
Ricky! Come be Linda Hansen.
Hi, Linda Hansen, Teaching and Learning. Sorry, Linda. Ricky Scott, Science Specialist, Teaching and Learning. So
Yeah, so when it comes to this, sorry, remind me where we are again.
Okay, so what I want you to talk about is, a timeline. So we're saying let's review these standards every 10 years, but if it takes 3 years
to get you're looking at 13.
That's right,
That's
implementation.
why the frequency is lower in these.
Yeah. So how do we incorporate beginning into when we want the standards to be renewed?
So the implementation is going to be kind of a drawn-out process, especially for a tested subject. So working with our assessment specialist up in the science world, from adoption, we have at least a 15-month window in which we need to prepare an assessment. So that usually gives us one full school year to kind of start preparing teachers, doing some kind of professional learning and training. And then the following year, where we're kind of doing a more in the classroom, usually it takes about 2 school years to get there. Yeah. But again, that's assuming that we can get done by the beginning of that first school year, right? So I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. So if you're talking about 2 years to revise standards, 2 years to prepare the field with a test and everything else, and then implementation, it becomes a 5-year process.
Yeah. So maybe we want to maybe we want to start these 5 years before the 10 years are up.
Right.
I feel like that's going to be a whole separate topic. Like the one we're dealing with is starting the standards, but I think we need to talk about this too because it's a burden on teachers.
Well, I think it does play in. I
yes.
want to add to that because in terms of if we do a 10-year return,
that's true.
You're waiting 4 more years, so it's really a 14-year turnaround. So I think maybe decreasing the 10-year review is actually 2 fewer years than that, so that in 10 years you would have a new standard rather than in 14 years.
Ricky, did you want to speak in then Scott?
Well, it's just that if I'm looking at this 10-year cycle that we have as an example, it gives us 1 year to revise standards. It's taken 2, so we'd have to add revise, adopt, introduce. So, I mean,
health was 2 years as well. So I think that's more common with the protocol we have now, that it's going to take more time. So really realizing that chart probably even needs to be updated with 2 years for review, because that's really how long it's been taking us for the last.
Would that be part of something
we
could do?
Yeah, absolutely.
If I can, I'll add also just the difficulty. We've been talking since we adopted 6.8 in 2015, and we're told that soon after we'd be doing it, that we're going to be 5 years past almost since we first adopted that. And we've had schools and districts that have been on hold in their curriculum. They haven't bought, they haven't spent, they haven't put any money into science because they're saying, well, we're going to get new standards. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so, again, so that planning is really important for that reason, too, so they know when to allocate funding, when to prepare for those changes. So science has been almost stagnant in a lot of cases because, and maybe Darren could speak to that as well.
So 6-8, some schools aren't even doing the.
No. Well, they are. But what happened is what I'm saying is 6-8 is now time is being spent on that. Right. But where we're struggling is in the elementary world because elementary was told it soon after.
Waiting.
Yeah.
And so elementary is like, well, then we're not going to spend money on curriculum. And they're not updating books, they're not updating anything. So.
I think
let's go to Scott.
Your other challenge real fast is 6-8 was done.
Yep.
And now there's a big space.
Yes.
So does he go back and only do 6-8 or do you do K-12? Like it does cause some issues.
Those are
and me putting science, well, it's science 6-8 and then it's science everybody else. Yeah. In terms of what actually is happening.
Scott, go ahead.
I just think 10 years is unreasonable. We need to find something to do to speed that up. So I would prefer not to even talk about a 10-year cycle, but talk about when this triggers us to do it.
Right, me too.
And as soon as they trigger, we should be getting the word to the LEAs that, hey, there's going to be a revision and we predict that it's going to be done on this date so they can make those plans. We also need to look at that process. It's taken us way too long to do this, and I think there's things that we kind of took a step in the wrong direction as far as timing with the action that was taken for a board review, additional board review on this. And I think we need to look at that process and see what we can do to, get this from kickoff to the
It'll be interesting because I know CTE's up later.
Yeah, I agree. I think it takes too long. It shouldn't take that long.
No. Darren, if we're just going to direct staff, do we need a motion? Or can we just direct staff to do this?
So it's
I know we have a motion on the table.
Yeah, it's an action item, so your action could just be to redirect staff to come back.
Which is what you did. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, that's a clarifying point, because the way I looked at this work Diana had done is there were several options. And so the 10-year cycle was one option. the rubric where you would evaluate it and make decisions not on a schedule was the other option, which is what Board Member Hanson talked about.
Which is what
I think that, we didn't say rubric, but I think let's put that in the
So
motion.
in your redirection, to staff, if you'll just clarify.
I'd like to give a little. So in this rule, it says the State Board of Education shall establish a timeline for the review of standards, or for the review by a standards committee of core curriculum, and then it lists all these areas.
So it does require
that you'll have a timeline.
Which one are you looking at?
So this
But
is
when
from,
we talked about it before, the
this is
timeline
HB
could be
342
when I
from
talked
the
to Diana.
2014 session.
What's the code?
What's the
I
code?
can't remember who talked about that, but the rubric would fit into that
Timeline.
I
If
don't
we were
know.
doing it and whatever frequency you want, that could be the timeline.
Yes.
Or triggers.
Yes, the
What are
rubric fits in that, but we
triggers,
could make sure there was something
Yeah,
in there.
we could.
So let me restate the motion, and let's see if we agree, and make sure I do it right, Norley.
Yep.
Okay. So the motion before the committee is that we select the rubric, cyclical review of standards, and we direct staff to add a weighting system, point system, including input from the field, etc. Okay. All those in discussion? Oh, I guess we already discussed. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that
Aye.
motion. And then, if it's okay, if as you guys have looked at the questions, I know before we said, send those to Diana, but if you guys find anything, I don't want to add to the questions necessarily, but if you guys see concerns, maybe could they send them to you and as part of your input?
Yep.
That's what I said.
Yes, I think you did your job. She gets extra money. Thank you for your engagement. Yes, thank you for playing. I appreciate it.
Do we want to bring the standard process back again? Am I hearing that as well?
Yeah.
I think we do.
Okay.
Is that
I think, yeah.
okay?
But,
I think we need to.
Linda's weighing in on that as well.
Yeah.
So
All right, we'll have an action item for
Oh,
both of those.
you're wonderful.
Or at least information on that first, maybe, but action for this one. So.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
So
Thank you.
the second one then would be suggestions from staff as ways to speed that up. Is that-
Yeah.
Do you want me to come with those? Would that be
Please.
great?
Well,
Okay.
we might need to bring back that what we changed that last.
Well, and
I
I
think
think
we
we
talked
have
about
to
that.
keep in mind what it takes to get through the process that we've created.
Yeah,
Right,
I'd like
'cause I
to-
think-
I'd like to see the timeline that says.
Maybe we'll bring
Sometimes board members don't
standards,
know those
like
repercussions.
routines and what
Yeah.
the timelines have been based.
Yes.
Because the model, I know it's shifted over the last 3 standards runs, but
Yeah.
it's pretty similar. So it can show you, it's basically taking a couple of years to get through the process.
This would be good.
Before it wasn't taking that kind of
Okay.
time.
We're going to streamline. This is going to be the streamline committee. We've got it down from 12 to 10. Let's
love
go to
it.
5. Just kidding.
That's what CTE is at, so I'll go with
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank
Okay, we are on to action item 6.2, which is Utah Perkins state transition. And Tilly is here to talk to us about that. It looks like we're submitting a 1-year transition plan, and then we're going to have a 4-year plan coming up in 2020.
That's correct.
So, and let's go ahead and have you talk to us first, and then we'll ask questions.
Great. Talia Longhurst, Director of Career and Technical Education. With me, I have Wendy Morton. She's one of our coordinators, and this is her primary responsibility. We were here a couple of months ago presenting information on the Perkins 5 law that was passed by Congress and the President last summer. We're here today to present our 1-year transition plan for Perkins 5. The way the law works, it allows us to have a 1-year transition plan for the school year 1920 while we continue to work on developing our full 4-year Perkins 5 plan, which you'll be seeing in coming months. So what we have for you today is that transition plan. It requires a lot less than we're used to doing. So that's always a good thing. And what you're seeing is based on the guidelines that we have to date. So just as we all have timelines to follow, the Federal Department of Ed also has some timelines. We're expecting them to release the final guidelines next week for the transition plan. We've written the transition plan because we have to have it to you now so that it's approved in time to meet our May 24th deadline. So that it is possible they may have some minor changes. Truthfully, I don't expect anything major or substantive. So if there's minor tweaks that need to be made, we'll go ahead and make those once we get that guideline document next week, but I don't anticipate really any major changes. As a reminder, Utah State Board of Education is the eligible agency for Perkins 5 for the state of Utah. We also work with our partners at the Utah System of Higher Education and the Utah System of Technical Colleges. They also benefit from this law and the funding that comes to our state, and so they are closely involved in the writing of this plan and helping us move forward. So Wendy can answer any and all questions.
Oh.
I used to do that job, and it's now hers, and so I kind of let her take the lead on it. But let's open it up for questions and discussion and anything.
The document looks great. Committee members, do you have questions? Janet?
I kind of have some big overall questions that because you guys are experts, I wonder if you could address a couple of these for me. So we've been talking for years about career and college ready. So I think we understand what college ready needs. You know, we talk about kids in AP classes and kids in IB classes and that kind of thing. So how well are we doing at determining whether or not our graduates are career ready? Because I think that falls more into your realm of expertise.
So that is a great question. And I would actually say that I think Utah is doing remarkably well in this area for a couple of different reasons. I just presented at a conference last week in Washington, D.C. around some of the things that Utah is doing, some of the legislation we have, some of the initiatives that go on here. And we're one of the only states that has a 1.0 credit CT graduation requirement. We're one of the only states, although there are more coming on board now, with a middle school requirement for college and career awareness. There are lots of pieces that we have in place. Concurrent enrollment has been such a huge factor here in Utah. And CT, if I remember my numbers correctly, makes up about 30% of concurrent enrollment here in Utah. We have all of those things. And that helps students to at least investigate things that they're interested in. And hopefully, in our work with counselors and teachers and administrators, helps them to help guide students more intentionally along the way towards things that they're interested in. I always tell the story of my own cousin many years ago now, when he was in high school. He took courses just because he thought they sounded fun, right? But he knew what he wanted to do for a living, but he didn't think to take classes, which were at his high school, that would further him along that pathway. We want kids to be intentional. If you want to explore for your high school career, go forward and let us help you explore. But if you have ideas or you learn about things that you're good at, you're interested in, we have ways of helping you move along that pathway. So to answer your question, I think Utah's doing remarkably well in that area. If you talk to employers, the number one answer they will give you on what they want to see are those soft skills or workplace skills, right? And I think that's everyone's responsibility in education, helping students to work in teams and to be problem solvers and all of those things, to communicate effectively. Those are always really important. But then when you talk to employers, okay, aside from that, what do you want? And it's that knowledge of technical skills and abilities, being able to perform skills, to do things. And that's what those CT courses really are focused around.
Can I ask another?
Yeah. Go ahead, Jen.
I was just wondering, I was looking at the fingertip facts, and there were some things in there that show things concerning CTE. Can you mention those? Are you aware?
So the at-a-glance document. Yep. So our graduation rate. So when you look at pathways, Wendy's going to pull it up so I don't misquote numbers. Thank you.
I'm testing.
Perfect. So when you look at graduation rate, Utah as a whole, I think we're at 87%. Darren, does that sound right?
That sounds about right.
Yep.
Maybe just a hair under that.
Yep. So 86 to 87% for all graduates in the state of Utah. For students who get into high school and start to follow these sequences of courses in career clusters, career areas, and they concentrate, which is a Perkins term that means 1.5 credits within that sequence of courses. They actually graduate at 95%. So it's that same cohort of students with the one difference that they're concentrating in CTE classes. I could spend an hour expanding on why I think that is the case. And of course, I'm biased and I have lots of opinions. But that one...
Can you add in also the college piece of that, like they're more likely to
that is correct.
Graduate from post-secondary.
And that really, so I've been doing this for about 30 years now, and in my experience, we've really moved from CT as kind of a terminal sort of a thing. Once you finish, you might get a certificate after high school. It really has moved now towards post-secondary training and education as a focus. It's not just terminating at the end of high school. And so we do want those kids to move on to college, and the vast majority of them do. And in Utah, we like to say college means 1, 2, 4, or more.
Yeah.
And so it's that 1-year certificate, 2-year degree, 4-year degree, or more. And the students really are going on. You met a student yesterday in your board meeting who was an amazing example of what we want to see all students doing.
That's the reason she's going to college. It looked like to me.
Exactly.
That's great.
So I had another one. This is about the rigor of CTE courses. And I'm wondering a question like, so say we have students that are working in carpentry and they're figuring all of this out. Would that be equivalent to like having a course in geometry? Or do we have any equivalence like that where the academic rigor of a CTE could help a student gain academic credit in another area?
Yeah, also a great question. Yep, also a great question. So we do have a list. It lives on the Teaching and Learning website along with the graduation requirements. And that list, and actually you'll find it in this document, but I think about it. A list that we've worked on for years and years that shows all classes, including CT classes, that can count for graduation credit, whether it be in the area of English language arts, math, science, etc. So there is an approved list, and schools can determine whether or not to follow that guideline. The other piece that you have, there was one more piece I wanted to say. Oh, regarding the math component, Diana, for many years, and I have worked closely together around how can we build some new kinds of courses. You'll see one of the courses on the math list is a medical math course. And Diana and I, when we were both specialists way back in the day, worked really closely together to develop that course, to develop the endorsements that go along with it, and to make sure that the rigor was there, that it could count for a third-year math course. It's an awesome example. We have a lot of work to do in that area, and I think making sure that the rigor is there is really the essential piece, and that's what we need to work on.
Great questions.
I have one last one.
Well, okay. Since they're great, you can have another one.
So what we hear about all the time, and that always worries me, is that we are now seeing students, and we have to prepare them for jobs that do not yet exist. So how does CTE in Utah address that issue?
So also a great question. So the first thing that comes to mind,
she was going to throw it back at you.
The first thing that comes to mind, given your past discussion from just a minute ago, is that ability to be more flexible and to update and to change on a dime, if you will. And especially I think about, to your question, I think about information technology and computer science. And we know that those things change every day. And so that ability, and we try to build in ways that we can be flexible, try some things, pilot some things as we build out new courses and get them implemented into the schools. So we have that ability. We're on the agenda for the next item when we can talk more about that process.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Anybody else have questions about Perkins 5 and Utah's transition plan?
Yes.
I'm going to take that as a yes.
Yes, but I'm trying to find So to address a little bit, how does, I have many questions as well, so if you
can have 4.
Okay.
Just kidding.
First question off the top of my head. I know that Congress has a bill right now, and I just lost it. Has a bill, HB 399, that has been submitted, has already been introduced to the House of Representatives about the PATH Act, or the Pre-Apprentice to Hard Hats Act. Is that already predetermined to incorporate that? Was that talked about in DC? And how does the law that was passed this last session for apprenticeships impact?
So I'm going to let Wendy jump in if I say something incorrectly. And Travis Cook upstairs is our expert in this area. But we do have an apprenticeship act that was passed through our legislative session. This is designed to be very similar. Our Utah Department of Labor and the Federal Department of Labor are already working on non-registered apprenticeships. We'll be moving forward as directed by them. I know that Stadler Rail is working through a partnership with Salt Lake Community College and Salt Lake City School District right now in a pre-apprenticeship sort of a arrangement. There are quite a few things rumbling that local businesses will be working on with school districts.
How much data is is changed?
So if you look at the plan, I can try to answer that. So in Utah, that apprenticeship program would count as a program. So we would consider a CT student as part of an apprenticeship program. It's a work-based learning experience, but it's also got a lot of educational components where they're taking courses and they're participating in a lot of these other pieces. So if you look in the transition plan on page 18, you can see a chart. That is the most information. So we do everything by aggregate. They never get individual student information. And if there's less than a certain number of students participating in a program, we report it as 0.
Okay.
And so that chart gives you a really great example of how what our federal partners would see in the data that we report. And so it's all aggregate, total numbers, and you would never ever see an individual student.
Okay, great. Yes. When it comes to microcredentialing, is that being looked at as well? For example, high school student, I'm going to take mine, works at Harmon's. He has now been introducing to skills and demonstrating culinary skills to the public. How can he then implement that as a microcredentialing credit to say, I have a culinary credit that I can then apply to whatever, right? Is that...
So I'm going to speak in relationship to Perkins, and I can make some comments about CT in general, but in Perkins, one of the pieces of Perkins that we look at are industry-recognized credentials. Credentials can mean something that takes a number of years to achieve. It could take a number of hours. It could take a knowledge base that you just sit for a certification. There's a lot of pieces and a lot of options within that whole realm of certification and credential. A credit discussion ties to the LEA. So the LEAs award credit. LEAs do have the ability to look at a credential and tie that to a CTE course, and if they wanted to use that as their competency indicator for that particular course, they could do so. If it's a portion of a course, they could choose to award a portion of credit as an LEA. They have that option, right? To use that as a competency indicator for that course. In CTE, we design our programs of study or our pathways with credentials in mind, so that as they earn them, they stack and they work in the direction, and sometimes they transfer from one program to another program, so they might be something that is helpful in multiple programs, but they would stack. And so a student may earn something in high school, but they also may earn something in grade 13, grade 14. It just really depends on the program they're in as to what credentials are available.
Okay, so then one follow-up. How have we included higher ed in those discussions into accepting those? Because, I mean, a student can say, I've been working on this is my micro-credential, but it's not seen at the district yet, and it hasn't been identified at the higher ed level, but can we demonstrate proficiency and accomplishment in...
So yes, and again, it depends. So like our LEAs, higher ed institutions have their own autonomy, and they have the ability to create programs, requirements for each program that they develop. That we do coordinate with them, and we do plan with them. We have articulation agreements with them. We are working with them to start recognizing more of the certifications or the credentials that the students earn towards actual credits towards the degree program. There are a few areas where this is moving forward more quickly, and it's generally in the information technology area. But it is something that higher ed institutions are looking at and working with us on.
Yeah, and I understand Representative Alexander is looking at updating the Higher Ed Education Act, right?
Yes, they are in the process.
In the process, and so are we watching that? Is it gonna create a big change for us here, or is it just gonna be an easy transition?
Well, we don't really know.
Okay.
I think until we really know for sure if that draft that they've just released is going to go anywhere, right? We won't really know. We could say no, but then maybe that would not be true,
the next
right?
year. Yeah.
So I think with what they've released so far and what we do know in the discussions we've had with our higher ed partners and in DC at our meetings is that our higher ed institutions are in support of some of the changes that have been proposed, and they don't see it as being a barrier for anything.
Okay. Okay, as long as it doesn't go into sharing more data, I'm concerned with, tracking the student from birth to death scenario, right, that we're all hearing, speculating about, right? Anything to stop that. But to allow the student to do what he or she wants to do, as well as even entrepreneurship. I mean, are we even talking about that?
Entrepreneurship is a course within CTE.
Okay.
And we encourage it in multiple programs of study within CTE.
Okay, great.
Okay. Are there any more questions before we look for a motion to approve the Perkins 5 transition plan? Okay, then I'm looking for a motion.
I'll make that motion.
Oh, Janice.
To approve the Perkins 5 transition plan.
The motion before the committee is to approve the Utah Perkins 5 transition plan. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Aye. Motion passes unanimously.
Right.
I guess you guys are staying.
We are.
Okay, the next action item is 6.3, which would be the CTE standards revision, which is a little bit different than our other standard revisions. So go ahead and talk to us about that, and we'll ask questions.
Great. The superintendency asks that we bring this to committee as information/action.
Yeah.
You don't have to take action. If you want to make any changes, you're able to do that today, as I understand it. So we do have a different process than the 10/12 step process.
Just kidding.
Soon to be 5. And let me explain the two different processes. You have a course revision for non-core subjects process, and that is a 5-step process.
Okay.
You might find anything of interest there.
All right.
But basically, these are for our non-core but still required kinds of courses, like general financial literacy that we oversee in CT, even though it's not really a CT course, it's a standalone, but we still oversee it. College and career awareness, which you just approved yesterday to go out for 30-day public comment. It's those kinds of courses. It's a one-course sort of a thing, and the process is there that you can see. It does go out for a 30-day review. There is a subject matter expert convening, reviewing, revision, and then we'll resubmit to you the final version of the standards for approval within the coming months for that particular course. But you can see that process right there.
From beginning to end, how long does that take, generally?
So I know with college and career awareness, I believe it's about a year.
So, but really a year, not with the fake year like with others? Not like
Between the time we started and when it's implemented.
A year?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just a couple of
Go ahead,
questions
Scott.
on
Yes.
that. So this committee that we convene,
Yeah.
what is it comprised of, and what kind of people
So,
are there?
Jonathan, do you know who Ashley had in her group this year?
I don't know specifically.
So generally speaking, and without Ashley being here to answer exactly who was on there, we usually bring in teachers who actually teach the content. We will bring in post-secondary partners, especially if it ties to any kind of post-secondary credit or program. We will bring in any kind of industry partner that may have a tie to the work. And we also have done some administrators as part of the process, and sometimes parents. It just really depends on the individual course, the content, and what is happening during the review process.
And let me just add one step. For the general financial literacy, the requirement is in statute as to who those members of the committee
just to follow up to that too, during the review period, are we actually soliciting? Are we sending this out like to industry and ask them for their opinion, or is it just posted on a website and say, we put up our public notice and say the 30-day review period started?
So we have a process in CTE, and it will come into play in the next set of standards review process as well. But it's a standards rating tool that's open 24/7, 365. And we work with an outside vendor, and they connect our standards, recruit industry, actively recruit on a regular basis. Public can go in, whomever wants to. You go in, you register, and then you have immediate access to the standards, and you can rate how these align to your business and industry and whether.
But for example, if it's a welding class or something, then we'd go out to outside industry, and there are actually people that we're sending it to and asking for their review, not just posting it and then passively waiting for review.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
How do they rate? I mean, you said you go in and get immediate access, and then they can rate the standard.
Right. So we've been doing using this particular tool for just under a year, and so far the feedback has been incredibly connected. So they feel like we're on the right track. I don't remember, have we seen anything where there were major changes being asked for?
Not yet.
Yeah.
So do they rate on a scale, though? Do they?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Also, we use our listservs, so all of our specialists have listservs where they're connected to LEAs and others, and they send those out to that group and collect feedback through that in addition to the posting on the website.
I'm wondering if we can have a demonstration of the standards rating tool at some point. I think I'd really like to see how it works.
I would too.
We can do that.
Did you want to go over the other ones?
Yes.
Okay.
So that is the first one, and then the second one, and both of these the board has previously approved.
Yeah.
The other one is for our general CTE courses. These are elective, non-core kinds of courses. It's a 4-step process, and we use a rotation schedule like you talked about before.
Yeah.
Generally, we're on a 4-year rotation. The courses are reviewed by pathway. So the courses that are within a pathway, we lump those together and they're reviewed on a cycle so that each particular specialist has different pathways, therefore different courses throughout that 4-year time frame. We do use a 3-year cycle for many of our IT-related courses because they need to be reviewed much more quickly. So the same... Pardon?
Not one?
Yeah. Well...
Every 2 months?
You'd be surprised. We actually do add new courses every year and take away courses that are.
I mean, by the time we get Apple 10, you've got 12 coming out.
Yeah, it's true. So those are again available, and we recruit industry, public comment, et cetera, and then we present those to you in November every year at committee, and then full board approval hopefully in December, and then we implement in July of the next year.
And I think from us, you're just looking to see if we have any recommendations for changes to these standards, the revision process. So I'm wondering if board members, anybody has a motion, if you like the way they are, if you want to make changes. Do you guys need changes? Like, are you looking for changes?
Yep.
Okay, I just wanted to.
I am not personally.
Okay.
Please.
Yeah.
Oh, you would like them to
Public comment. Can I make a public comment?
Yes.
Does that count as public?
Public comment.
Because I'm new, I get to play the new card, but why are the processes so different between core and CTE? Do you guys historically, is there a reason? You probably know more.
Well, you get to be faster because you're CTE. Yeah, in statute. No, I mean, I think
it is in statute.
Okay.
It is in statute.
Like, can't we make a statute for?
Well, can't I just follow their statute?
It is in statute for you guys for your core classes.
You're going to follow.
I can direct you to the statute later.
Yeah, I thought there was something fancy about it.
There is statute around it.
But is one of the reasons also the lack of maybe public outcry on some of these? I mean, we've got
possibly.
Well, and things change, and if industry's driving it,
our industry partners are
language arts teachers don't really drive things very well.
It's not as controversial.
Well, and I would also say there's not a standardized test on what is 100? How many? 300. There's not a standardized test for 300 courses, right? Where there's standardized tests over.
Well, there are tests.
There's tests, but they're so individual and so specific.
You're right. That's a good
that
point.
they can because they're smaller, they can change over more quicker. If that didn't sound right.
You can say anything you want.
Thank you.
More quickly.
Thank you. More quickly. And whereas, core standards, academic standards take a lot more depth of knowledge and
big.
And bigger and
too big.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm looking for a motion. I think the motion is that we like what you're doing, but I will
this was
continue.
just an information, wasn't it? Do we need?
I think
this
it's
is
an
an
action.
action.
It's information as
Or
a
action.
It's or action. So we
It has-
don't have.
It has posted, so you could take action.
Okay, but if we don't want to make any changes, we don't need to make a motion. No change. Thank you so much for all your information. Thank you so much. Okay, our next item is information, and it's Science with Engineering Education Standards for Public Review Update.
Hi, Ricky Scott, again, Teaching and Learning. So I'm just here to give the third update to our 90-day review period for the draft Science and Engineering Education Standards. I prepared backup kind of showing where we are, where we've been, some of our numbers, and I'm just here, I guess, to answer any questions you might have.
Well, I would like to hear about what kind of attendance you had. I mean, it looks like not very many people. I would love your thoughts on time is working, the type of feedback, is it working?
Right. It's hard to. It's hard to know because we had all of our meetings at the same time. They were all 6 to 8. There was no way to measure this one was this time we had more, so we have no comparisons to make. So what I could say is that our numbers were very low throughout all of our meetings. We had in the face-to-face meetings an average of maybe 10 to 12 people at all of our meetings. At least 2 or 3 of those were the same people attending all of the meetings.
They're following you. They're science stalkers.
I thought you were Bill Nye. Just kidding.
I signed autographs.
I know. We're all 10.
Right. So for the online hearings, we offered the online ones. It was really interesting.
Oh, was it? Okay.
The very first one. So again, the way we had the system set up was in order to allow as many people as possible get some order to the meeting. We had people sign up in advance.
Yeah.
For the first meeting, no one signed up.
It was scary.
And so we still held the meeting, and after 15 minutes, when no one was there, we kind of just shut it down.
Okay.
In the second meeting, we had 4 people sign up. 2 of them actually showed up to say their things to say, gave their feedback, and we had a few people also kind of jump on and hear. But other than that, again, they just weren't very well attended. Honestly, the biggest way we're getting feedback right now is through the online survey.
Every person who attended the online also attended
at
least one in-person meeting. Every single person who commented online also attended at least one.
Yeah, that's a good comment. So
really interesting. And that was Jolie, right?
Oh, it was you?
You need.
Just kidding.
You need to say
To announce
just
it.
to announce.
Oh, I'm like, she's like,
attended.
I went.
Just
you guys
people
know.
online.
I was online.
I also attended the meeting.
I follow Ricky.
So that actually is a really good point.
Thanks,
So
Sorry.
the 2 people that spoke on our
I was actually saying
that showed up to speak at our online hearing also showed up at our public
Okay,
hearings.
that's so interesting. Scott?
As far as the signing up in advance, could they do that just before the meeting? Could they just log on, or did that have to be done way in advance?
So what it has, the system was set up in a way that we wanted in advance. So we had weeks in advance opened up. It was still open right before. Actually, no. We closed it. I want to say we closed about 24 hours before, just because we want to make sure we could plan ahead. But what happened was anyone else that was there, we kind of opened up the floor. We see there's this person, and this person. Would anyone else like to speak?
So that wasn't keeping people away from the meeting.
Lisa.
So I did attend an online one, and there was some debacle because I tried to get on by the link that was provided, and it wasn't the link that I was provided, and I couldn't get on. So there was, I think, still kinks that needed to be worked out.
Yeah, maybe.
Kinks with the links?
Kinks with the links, because then I ended up getting on my phone, being that Superintendent Dixon sent to me to get on. So that was a problem, which I'm glad we experienced it being the first time, right?
Well, it was actually the second meeting.
But as far as the whole process, this is the first time using this type of outreach, and so things just some workings through that we need to be aware of. Allowing the public to access the link that is provided. I heard different stories on the back end that there was some IT problems and they had uploaded the wrong link. So that was unfortunate.
But again, so there's still, I mean, there's so many ways now, I guess, to do it. So,
what's left for us to do?
So really, I mean,
can I ask a question too?
Yeah,
Sorry.
Linda, go ahead.
So I was the one out in Alpine, and I think there were probably 20 people there, maybe, or so, Ricky. I don't remember
that was our biggest
counting,
meeting,
but I'm guessing. That was the biggest one. And but, you know, I read about the last one, the last face-to-face one that you guys had, because I think there must have been a reporter there, because I read about that one in the paper. And would you say that the comments were fairly similar? Because it sounded to me like that they were totally different. That you know, the input she gave in the media was totally different than my experience at the first one.
Yeah. So
without
it was,
going into detail, were they
correct?
Very
it was very
dissimilar?
different. It was very different in the fact that of the kind of comments that were made. And again, there were only, I think there were about 10 or 11 people in the room for that one. So there were very few people, but because of the few people, we opened it up and people could just speak and then speak again and then speak again. And so there was plenty of ample opportunity for them to speak, but it was very much just the side, as you noted in the trib, that were, it was just really one side. There was about 2 people from the like education specifically that had some other things to say about. Yeah.
And public comment closes April 11th?
April 11th, it closes at 11:45.
So let me ask you this. I had a board member ask me, would it be appropriate and would you be okay if board members sent specific feedback to you with their names on it? Maybe just so that you'd be okay with that.
Yeah.
So board members, if you're listening out there, get it to Ricky by April 11th so we can streamline this process.
Well, and again, so another thing too is with the change that was made.
Yeah.
I guess now the next step for us is to kind of just present all the data of the 90-day review to the board, and then the board will give direction on how to make changes. Am I correct with that? That's I guess the change that has occurred.
And tell us as a committee why that makes it a much longer process.
So what was happening was, because the direction that we were given before was that during the 90-day review process, science writing teams, because the majority of the feedback that we get comes in the first 30 days. The large majority, because feedback we hear after that time is just kind of repeats of what we've already heard. I would say that every now and then we get a few novel ideas that are new, but for the most part, the first 30 days. And we learned that with grades 6, 7th, and 8th. So when we did those, we waited the whole time to hear, because that's the direction that we had. So this time we had more leeway. We met as a leadership, kind of looking at that feedback, and they were already working on making some changes and looking at what they would do based upon the feedback that they were receiving. And that was kind of moving forward to the point where we were hoping to be able to have in May a draft ready to present. But with this change, everything was kind of put on hold, and now we just canceled meetings, and we're just kind of waiting. So now, because of that, we're going to present in May. We're going to present the results of the 90-day review. That will go to this committee for the committee to then make recommendations on how to move forward, and then that will go to full board. So what my writing team would like to know is, for that May meeting, when the recommendations are being made, would it be okay if they could be here as well to be like, here's what we were thinking, here's what we were seeing. Can they be a part of some discussion, at least, of what they were thinking to move forward based on the feedback?
Do we have to ask leadership?
Yeah, you're asking about for this committee meeting.
Right, for the committee meeting and potentially for full board.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
So anyway, so they just wanted to make sure that they were kind of they could hear what they were thinking. Anyway, so it was delayed in that way, and the fact that now May and June it goes committee and full board to get direction on where to move forward, and then we can reconvene our writing teams to make changes in June to hopefully bring back a draft in July.
August, because we don't have a meeting in July.
Yeah. Sorry, August.
Oh, so my last day is June.
So again, now we don't have a draft till August, and what that has done, by the way, is talking about that 15-month window to prepare a test. If we're not done until September, October, we've now missed a deadline to be able to implement the standards with the test next school year. So we've now there's a possibility.
Back a year.
It pushed back implementation an entire year. So on that good note, So anyway, so we're moving forward, and we've gotten a lot of good feedback, and we're excited to prepare. At least I'm excited to go through. I mean, there's just been mountains and mountains and mountains of feedback. So I'm trying to think of a way to. My thought process is just to kind of put together a summary of sorts of here's what's happening, but then here's all the raw data if you want to go into it, hundreds and hundreds of pages. So
I think it'd be nice some board about wanting that available. Go ahead, Linda.
I'm only hearing part of it, so I apologize if I'm not getting the general gist. So the reason why we're pushed back is because we need to bring it to committee sooner, or it just needs to go to the full board. It's going to take longer to get to the full board.
So the reason, Linda, why it was pushed back is with the new additional step in the standards review process, that the board has to give direction to the writing team on how to move forward. That's delayed us these 3 months in our process. So that's what happened. So that it's just one new step that I've had to go through.
Okay.
Any other questions for? Yeah, go ahead, Lisa.
Is it possible, Rick, if you could, instead of submitting to the board like hundreds and hundreds of, of the feedback, maybe what's it called, a word monkey, or Wordle? Bring in, what are the main words that are? Yeah. A Wordle to.
I guess that could be one way to measure it. It's not.
To see what the major.
The thing about a Wordle is, again, it would just get words. So probably the biggest word in the middle will say science, and then next to that is engineering.
Okay, so what would be a great way to get a gist? Like, what percentage of, of one section, had most attention? What was the reason
That's a great question.
I think you said you'd write like a summary.
Right. So our online survey provides that in a way where every single strand of every single grade is going to have at least some quantitative measurement that we can take. It's like, do we like it as it is, or do we want changes? So we can provide that data and kind of a table for all grades and all strands as more of a visual aspect, but that's just for the online. So we could probably see there are some areas that maybe are a little higher or lower. But yeah, that's a possibility.
If we could do that, if I could motion for staff to do that when they present it to the board, it might save time, and if there is such a thing right now, and if board members wanted even more further feedback, they could come to you for more detailed feedback. But I think that will give us a general idea of what we're more concerned that needs to be addressed on the standards needs to be.
Just could I have Jolie? Do you want to clarify that, or
I would just like clarification. This is Jolie, honey.
Okay, and she attends everything.
Lisa, I think I'd like more clarification, because what I'm hearing you say, I think, is what we used to do before we just submitted all of the feedback. Like it was like we did have that summary of, this many people said this general comment, and these are the big ideas.
But this is
after
I want to make sure
that what you're, but I want to make sure that's what you're asking.
That is what I'm asking now that it's after the 90 days, so we can see what the public has said. And then we can add our own thoughts and then pinpoint exactly where the highlights and lowlights are of the commentary. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. And we used to do that, and I think we still do it, but I think that in addition to all of the comments, I did see why we want to make sure we have both.
That was my original plan. Before the change was made, my plan was to present, here is all the stuff that we saw. Here's the results of the 90-day review, and here's a draft based on what we saw the changes should be because of that, all at the same time.
Yeah.
And now that it's split, it's
I don't think the board was aware that it was going to push things back. I think if we told the board that it was, that they may rethink it, because I think that was one of the questions, and I just don't believe that the board realized that it was going to push it back that far.
I'm not going to say verbatim what my other colleagues would say, but I can tell you that board member Ellis and Bolter and Earl will say, well, we want to be fully informed of the whole process, right? They want to know as much as they can up front. And so I know that puts more burden on staff and everything, and it pushes back. But, we've just been out of so much, and I think the public has been out of so much that creates more of a transparency review, which is great, but then it expands the timeline. So.
Any other questions or comments for Ricky? Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Are you jealous of Jody Kaufman?
Jan, I just, we report this to the board. I would make the comment that I think we should give them the information.
I do too.
That we've just been given as well, so that if they want to make changes, or then we can address that in full board meeting.
Can we move it at this point? Like, unless we would have done it this. Jennifer?
Well, here's how I think you could do it.
Okay.
So have him be prepared for either option. So if he...
Yeah, it might be action. There might be action.
On the agenda, depending on
so the biggest problem is the deadline that assessment gave me was we had to have adoption by June.
Yeah.
Adoption had to happen in June. And so because of that, in order to be able to continue to have a test in time with enough leeway, especially if some of our vendors that are fairly, we want to make sure we give them ample time. Because we've canceled meetings, there's no way of getting that done. Okay. There really isn't.
So we're past that.
Well, Ricky, could we get it done if we called an extra committee meeting to bring it before the board before June?
Because
committees do that once in a while. We've seen law and license do that. Finance has done that recently. To call special committee meetings to get something specific done.
Okay. Well, again, I'm willing to wait for direction on the board on where to move forward. So.
But Ricky? Is that a possibility? If there was an extra committee meeting, so we could bring it to the board before June. It's possible, right?
What it would come down to
but
is
under our current schedule, it would be possible.
Yeah, if there's a way we can work around it with our teacher's schedule. We have a fairly large writing team with all of these 10 grades with about 6 teachers in each grade. That's 60 to 70 teachers. If you give me that direction and I'm okay to put them together potentially sooner, then I'll push to make it happen. But
I know the board would have to weigh in, but we could have it.
You can have it ready.
And whichever version you guys land on, we'll either just bring the public comment or we'll bring public comment and the draft.
So,
okay, sit down. Let's strategy. Okay.
So then,
thank you. Sorry.
This is good,
Linda.
So then, if the full board then will have to weigh in on this in the May meeting, correct? So that's the soonest we will hear.
Yes, if we could weigh in on the
June would be your final.
I still, the problem with that in my mind is that if we don't know until May if I could have this meeting, I have to turn around and have documentation ready for
what we're saying.
Yeah,
Jennifer explained it. So what would happen is you would bring back the draft version in May, or just the public comment. So it'd be public comment or public comment and draft version. They would go through the draft.
Yeah.
Then we would take the full version to the board in June. So
if we brought back this other rule or motion that we did.
When is the draft? When would the draft be?
Are you giving me permission to get my writing team back together now? Can that happen? Is that what I'm hearing?
Darren, will you say what you just said?
So the full version would still come through this committee before going to the full board.
Yes.
So
but
I just want to.
So
I get
Is it possible?
I get uncomfortable anytime it starts to feel like assessment is driving any instructional work, because assessment should never do that. It's there to support instruction, right? So, in the dilemma we have with assessment, so we're a year later and getting to a place where we're operational field testing the test questions. That still doesn't change the fact that if you adopt somewhere in the October, November, that you start preparing your field, the teachers, for adopting the standards. And we just
the sooner we can adopt.
And I think actually what Jennifer says, it might be a good idea, because if we can fix this in the May meeting and we have both options, regardless if we need it for assessment, we could implement sooner. And I think most of us would support that. So, I don't know.
I think the field would be supportive in terms of they've been waiting, holding, because it's taken a couple of years to get this process done.
Yes.
This adds another potential year that they can't start.
Yeah.
A lot of them were prepped for this one because they thought it was going to happen in time. So they're perceiving as if this is happening in some ways, and we'd rather support them with the correct standards than their hope of what those standards might be, if it's possible. But we also understand their
and also
policies
you
and
canceled
guidelines,
meetings. We understand that too, but it may open up the options a little bit.
Potential, we could be prepared for both, and whatever the board decides would be the option, be ready for.
Oh, Darren?
So Ricky, your writing committee, though, they don't just write these. I mean, it takes a significant amount of time. And so one of the risks of this would be they put a bunch of work into writing this, and then they still have to get together and do more writing. So there's risk to that as well, especially because it's outside what the full board expects to see.
I'll tell you that there was a meeting planned on March 28th where all of these people were going to come in, and that meeting was canceled. So I mean, that was the moment in which we were going to do a lot of the heavy lifting, with the hope that with the last 2 weeks that were remaining of the public review, we could, through email or through some other process, being able to make those tweaks if they came in.
And cancel because of the board change.
Yes.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm not clear about how it could possibly happen, though. I love the idea. We can come back either way, but I'm not clear about how that can happen at this point with the writing team just canceling the March 28th meeting. So I'm for it, but I think unless you're clear on it, Ricky, I'd like more clarification about what that could look like.
What are you thinking, Ricky?
I'll just admit that I'm not clear either, because again, the idea of getting these people together in the next 2 weeks is probably going to be near impossible, just because they're all teachers or they're university professors and
finishing up graduation.
So I mean,
it's a hard time of year as well.
Yeah. So I mean,
we might just have to deal with it.
It's your opportunity
and learn from this mistake and not let it happen again.
Yeah,
I take one for the team, Ricky. Just kidding.
If I get the okay to try and put something like that together, I can attempt it.
If you fail, then we just
it doesn't matter if you fail. It's going to be what it already is.
You won't have available.
I'm also less about, because I feel like we can make that at April 27th, right after college graduation and just before high school graduation. But let's say that happens. And let's say they were to be able to make modifications and talk about things. I'm like, with the health standards, we then had a couple of meetings before it does that make sense? So I'm still kind of unclear as to how so does that mean that we would have this committee come together before that May meeting? Can I explain too later? I see the vision.
You get it? I feel it.
I feel like we can make this happen. It's just whether you get the group together. If it can't happen,
Ricky, permission to do whatever you want. I mean, you know what I mean. Permission to try this.
We'll move forward. And again, we just want to make sure the document we have is the best thing possible.
Help us know how we can
will never sacrifice quality for time.
Of course, we trust that. That's a given.
That's the number one.
Okay.
Thank you. Please let us know.
Thank you, Linda.
We'll let you know
what we can do. Tell me what to do. Okay.
And whether you say yes to it will be the whole question.
Tell me what to say yes to. Just kidding. Okay. Thanks everyone for all your input and ideas and questions. Just appreciate it. Okay, we're on 6.5 digital teaching and learning update.
So can I just make sure that I get clarification? So we are doing what?
Trying to get a meeting together so they can start writing the standards and presenting to the board.
So basically, Linda, the options would be stay with the current process or the option to go to the old process is kind of where we are. So current process would be public review, just bring the feedback, summarize the data, use Drive to tell Ricky what changes should be made. The other option is Ricky will come with the changes made based on the public feedback, and then you would give feedback further on what changes happen on those standards.
But we'd have to make sure the board
is
willing to first what they did.
I just wanted to make sure I was there.
Okay, I gotcha.
If not, we'll stick with just public review and you charge it.
So it would have to be an
I'm
action
not exactly sure where the speaker is for the phone, but it's really hard for me to hear you guys. You sound like you're really far away.
Linda, I'm going to hover over it. Are you ready? This is Jennifer.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically we're going to come with two options. So you'll get two board items to start with because the board needs to weigh on if they're willing to go back on the process adopted. So option one is Ricky will just come with public comment summarized, and you as a committee will charge him with what the next steps of feedback and reform or revision would be
to bring back a draft in the June meeting. The other option is, if the board is willing to go to the old process, we'll bring back the feedback summary of what the field said, as well as how we took their feedback to make the changes. And then you all would review the document as well to add any additional changes in preparation for it going to the board in June for a final review feedback, kind of like we did with health yesterday, to be able to approve those standards in June optimally.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Jennifer.
Okay. Yep.
You know, and I wonder, Jennifer, it might be good if you're willing to write that out, send it to committee. Sure. And then I think we can all be, because I think I'm on the same page, but I just want to make sure everybody.
I'm going to do option A, option B.
Oh my gosh, could you make a chart, color code it?
I'm very logical linear,
okay.
even though I'm the ELA person.
I got you, I'm kind of like that too.
If it's okay, that actually made sense, but the one thing that I think that would also is that Jody brought the revisions to the board, and then the next month was also the input from this group. So what we're talking about is for this May conversation, it would be a combination of those.
Yes. Add that in your little color-coded whatever. Okay, all right. Back to digital teaching and learning.
A new face of digital teaching.
Yes, good afternoon.
No long blonde hair. Okay.
Thanks for your patience, Todd.
No problem. Todd Call, Digital Teaching and Learning Coordinator. And I'm here to provide our quarterly update to the Digital Teaching and Learning Qualifying Grant Program. I'll start across the bottom. Everybody has this handout. It's also in board docs. A few programmatic updates to make you all aware of. We have reimbursed over 99% of all of the funds that were awarded to LEAs for FY17 and FY18. So excited for that and how those funds are being used. In the middle, you'll see what our current participation is across the state. So we have 80 LEAs that are participating as a full grant recipient, and we have 4 LEAs participating as planning grant recipients. Those planning grants mean that the following year, which is this next cohort 4, they are required to submit another application to participate as a full grant recipient. So 84 total LEAs participating, 80 at the full and 4 at the planning grant, which then takes us to cohort 4, which we're super excited. In addition to those 4, we have around 5 others that are currently in the application process and will be submitting their applications, their first draft, on April 17th. We'll be reviewing those with our advisory committee and providing feedback to those LEAs to help inform their second and final submission. And at that point, we'll come with recommendations to the board on LEAs to be approved or to not be approved. So excited about that. Up on top,
Does that, I'm looking at this, does that mean then that cohort 4 will consist totally of charter schools? Because it looks like you've got all the districts.
We do have 40 districts participating as full grant recipients, and one is a planning grant. So that one planning grant LEA will then be applying for a full grant this next year. So cohort 4 will have one district applying, in addition to between 5 to 10 other charter schools applying.
So you're going to mainly be bringing on charters.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. We have lots of opportunities to engage with our DTL community, and one of those ways that we do that is we actually split up all of the LEAs amongst our team, and we go out and make in-person visits to all of them. So this last fall, we went out and visited 70 LEAs across our team and had some incredible visits. And as part of those visits, we talked about how things are going, and we asked all of them to respond to this question that I put up on top. If you could tell the Utah State Board of Education one thing about digital teaching and learning in your LEA, what would it be? And it was so interesting and insightful to hear their responses. And I wanted to capture just a few of those and provide them to you so you could get a sense of what we're hearing from the field in how they feel and what they see being accomplished in DTL. The top one speaks to a comprehensive vision, which we think is so important for DTL. They're seeing what does it mean to be successful in teaching and learning, and how does DTL support their full vision across their district or charter school. The second one is a lot about teachers collaborating, and I love that it says that they're using technology very intentionally and very strategically. And that's one thing we see a lot when we go out and visit, is that it's not just about having devices or having access to software in classrooms, but it's being very intentional about its use or their use, and being very strategic in their use, and ensuring that technology is being used in ways that engage students in learning and that it extends and enhances their learning, not just engaged in the technology itself. So we're excited to hear that, and we heard that all across the state. The third, speaking to innovation and how there's a buzz across this large district, and that they're saying it's difficult to sometimes move the needle in such a large district, but they're seeing that happen because of their DTL efforts and the vision that they have. Then the fourth, about equity and access for all students and how DTL is helping support that vision. And then lastly, culture changing. I think the one thing that we heard most across all of these visits is that LEAs are seeing their culture changing, and they're having very intentional conversations about technology use. And I love that this was a charter school, and the one thing that they wanted to mention in addition to the culture changing is that they really appreciated the ability to interact with other LEAs, and not just other charter schools, but they specifically mentioned how much they appreciated interacting with other districts and how they were able to learn from what those districts have learned, and they were able to help support each other, which I thought was super exciting. So those are some of the things that we're hearing and seeing, and excited about what's happening, and excited to come with recommendations for cohort 4 in the next couple months.
I love that you asked those questions.
Yeah, and love their responses.
Oh, Lisa, go ahead.
So, a couple of questions. What would be the recommendations that you're going to be bringing forth so that we're aware of it? And two, how much of the digital teaching and learning is taking up of a classroom on a daily basis? How much, is it versus teacher interaction versus tablet in front of the students? What is the plan?
Yeah, great question. So the first one about the recommendations, it's a great question. So the application itself consists of 12 sections. So an LEA puts together a team, and they address 53 different elements across 12 different sections, from budget to infrastructure to support to data privacy to outcomes and everything else. They then submit those plans, and they're reviewed by an advisory committee. They provide feedback back to the LEA saying you hit 30 of the 53 elements. These ones you still need some work, and here are some ideas. They submit another application that's their final, and then that same advisory board reviews the application to say you hit all 53 or you did not. So the recommendation we would bring is these LEAs did everything that was asked. They met all 53 elements, and we recommend that they be approved to receive funding as part of the DTL grant program. These other LEAs did not. And in those cases, the recommendation may be to award a planning grant for them to continue developing their plan, and then to come back the following year.
Okay.
The second part, as far as how much time, it's a great question, and I think it varies all across the state. The message that we continue to send or share with LEAs is the importance of technology being used, like I said, very intentionally and very strategically, and not just using technology as a replacement. We talk a lot about different models that are available, a SAMR model, so we're not just substituting technology in the place of traditional methods of teaching. There's lots of different frameworks, and so in some classrooms it may not be used a whole lot, some it may be used more, but our message is always that when it is being used, that it's being used very intentionally, and that it's being used to enhance instruction, where the pedagogy is what's most important, and how do we use good instruction to help the technology then support what they're doing.
Is there, if I may, Chair, is there a separate pedagogy in place for digital teaching and learning versus what, we just passed, what was it, the teacher? Pedagogical standards. Yes, thank you. Is that completely separate from the standards we already have? Do we need to include that?
Do you want me to speak to that?
Sure, yeah.
So for that one, I think it's really about what's best in terms of what tool. So whether that's a piece of paper or the technology, that's what the pedagogical standards will kind of get for teachers is what tool is going to enhance the instruction in a way that engages students more fully, whether that's paper and pencil or using a technology device. It's meant to be engaging, so trying to get away from just seat time in front of a computer, but how are we engaging students during that time with the device? Because that's, I'm assuming, is maybe the concern.
Yeah, because, I mean, developmentally, I mean, I think we're missing the part where hand-eye coordination with cursive, you know, helps build the neurons and the focus of the brain, you know, physiologically, whereas computer, you know, kids zone out, right? And all of a sudden you've got function and reason problems now because they are not building that emotional bridge, right, with the amygdala. So I'm concerned about that's why I'm concerned about the length of data in front of, of time in front of a technology. When I hear Alpine School District say we're moving and pushing towards implementing technology in front of the students throughout the whole day, I'm like, wait a minute, right? Whereas if it's just to have a computer game for a math, you know,
I think it's how they operationalize it, because they might say you're in front of the computer, but we're working together, right? So it could still have interaction.
Right.
It's not the quality of the experience.
It's quality, but it's also length of time, because then these kids go home and they're sitting in front of the computer or the TV all day, or, you know. And so there's something to be said about old school.
Well, I think you have to look at it as the medium. Like sometimes the medium is paper, and sometimes the medium is technology.
Right, and so that's why I'm wanting to know which districts are overutilizing, right? Even if it is, you know, intentionally and strategically. I'm sure it's intentional, right? Strategically, maybe, but, you know, what are we missing? So quantity of time in front of a tablet is a huge concern of mine. As interactive and great as technology can be and used, and helps children advance on many levels. I mean, I use it for my children. But I'm going to have them sit down and read a tangible book instead of download it on the.
And I think it's at least my experience. It's not the LEA; it's the teacher.
It is.
So like
Well,
my child's teacher, she's
but
on
I've
4
had-
hours a day, and I said if I wanted an online school, I would have put her in online school.
Well, and
so there's the struggle. Like I get where you're coming.
Yeah. Well, I had a teacher say, you know, with reading, you know, I can put my kids in front of a tablet for 45 minutes and zone out and work on my stuff. I'm like, you're a teacher.
And that is not what DTL prescribes.
That's why they have to go through that process.
Well, and that's so I don't know what's being conveyed on that one-on-one.
What they have to submit,
but
and what they have to submit is not going to get at that. Not saying teachers aren't doing things like that, but that is not the LEA charging them to do things like that.
Well, but so when I have Alpine coming to me and say, we're going to move forward to have it implemented all through the day, I just like, do you know
we very much, I'm not familiar with that specifically.
Okay.
We very much see technology as a tool like many other tools in a classroom.
Yeah.
When do you need the ruler?
Right,
When do you need the laptop?
But a powerful tool when used appropriately and intentionally and in the right way and strategically in the right way that can really help improve instruction and not replace instruction.
Sure.
A small example, when we meet once a year with all of our LEAs in our DTL Summit, in addition to other venues and different opportunities, but we've introduced a framework to help leaders understand what they should be looking for when they're in classrooms and students are using devices. What is it that they're looking for? What questions are they asking themselves to ensure that the use of technology is engaging students in learning, not just engaging in technology? And what questions can we ask to ensure that it's really extending learning and enhancing learning? And so we've actually gone through different scenarios of saying a middle school teacher is doing this, this, and this, and this. And then we ask questions and we rate it and have them start evaluating to see, is this a really good use of the tool? Because if it's not, then either the instruction might need to change or the tool might need to change, or it might not even be technology, it might be something totally different. But having those questions in your mind really changes your perception. So it's not just a replacement of looking at a screen, but it's getting deeper than that. And what are they doing to engage in the learning outcomes that the teacher is trying to help those students reach?
Yeah, I think the professional learning they're engaging in is going to help move practice from that kind of experience.
Okay, can I have one more?
You can have one more.
Okay, so I'm also on the Student Data Privacy Policy Committee. when we talk about having a list of pre-approved contracts with applications that teachers want that have met the criteria that the state has with student data and everything, are the teachers, what's been the feedback of that? Are they favorable? Are they seeing roadblocks? What have you heard anything about that? Am I out to lunch? Tell me.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I think it's a great conversation to be having. As far as specific feedback about what's coming from the field, of whether it's appreciated or not appreciated, I don't know that I have answers to speak to that specifically. Okay. I can say that those 12 sections that I referred to in the plan, one of them specifically is around data privacy and security. Right. And someone from data privacy here in the agency actually sits on the advisory committee to help in the review of those plans, so that they're looking at it through their lens to ensure that everything is accounted for. Right.
I'm just wanting to know
Whitney
from on your side.
Yeah. You're not getting that feedback.
Not specifically directly to me, but it definitely is a conversation that we feel is important and needs to continue to be had.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions from committee? Janet?
I'm just wondering if you are doing anything to collect information about how digital teaching and learning is enhancing personalized learning of individual students and outcomes. So are you tracking, or what do you do to track? Or?
Yeah, it's a great question. So on the bottom left-hand corner of this handout, you'll see detailutah.org, which is where it's our dashboard that shows what's happening across the state. Every LEA plan lives on that site, as well as their implementation and their achievement and where they're going and how well they're doing in their implementation. There's a lot of good information there. As far as gathering data specifically, we continue to talk about the role of technology and how it can support personalized learning, knowing that it's not the only part of the equation, but it's definitely an important part of the equation. But our DTL community is very much involved in the personalized learning conversation, as well as the competency-based education conversation, and will continue to be. But I think there's great information on the site that we can leverage to ask that question and get more specific data behind.
And just with the strategic plan, we're starting to work on implementation around the plan of the strategies you approved. And so the work group, some of that work will start making those connections in the next few months as the team. You're leading that particular strategy or the goal of personalized learning. The technology component will be one vehicle for doing that. And I think being able to measure how technology is being used to leverage personalized learning in ways that are having impact and helping with competency and all of those pieces will be part of that conversation. So probably a stay tuned kind of thing. I mean, it sounds like there's some available now, but as you guys work on that strategy and the strategic plan, I think we'll have a lot more answers to that question as we move forward. So.
And Janet, just as an example, for Weber School District's digital teaching and learning plan, we had to submit how the data helped us accomplish student learning objectives. Like I had to go through different goals I wanted to meet for certain students, and we had to talk about how we were using the technology to do that. So we had to submit a big thing last year, like that and it made me really thoughtful in terms of how am I using technology in a thoughtful way to make sure my students are meeting their objectives. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so you guys are requiring us to do that.
Yeah,
and it's a good thing. I was like all mad, and then I'm like, oh, it's a good thing.
A lot of that is
intentionality.
I know.
And that's what's captured on the dashboard that shows it. And a lot of the flexibility that exists within DTL that LEAs appreciate is LEAs are in different places all across the state, and all of their outcomes are specific to student learning. But that can look different depending on where they are and what they need access to or what they already have and resources and lack thereof. And so LEAs their plans may look completely different depending on what it is that they need, but they all speak to these same required elements. And so LEAs that are at a position where they can really start going down the road of competency-based education or this personalized learning, they have the flexibility within DTL to do that, where others can continue building to get to where they need to be able to do that.
Yes, that's nice. Go ahead, Janet.
So I'm worried about your funding. So there's a thing that the changes to our culture could outlive the funding. So you're now working on cohort 4. We've got all the districts aboard. And so what's the life of your program? Do you have ongoing funding? Do you have, what is your future?
Yeah, so the money that's established now, I mentioned the 99% already being reimbursed. In FY17, there was $10 million of ongoing funding that was established, along with a $5 million one-time. In FY18, that one-time went away, and it was $10 million ongoing. Starting in FY19, that funding was doubled to $20 million ongoing. So this is the first year that our LEAs have had access to the additional funding, which they've been super excited about, and have been able to not revamp, but revise or amend their plans to be able to account for the additional funding. The comment about outliving the funding, I think, was meant as very much as a compliment, meaning that our culture is changing, and so that culture changing and what we're seeing with our teachers is really what's most important to them. And they're extremely appreciative of the funding, but it is established as $20 million ongoing.
Ongoing. And so is the plan to keep updating the technology? Is that what the plan for the $20 million is? Or
depending on where the LEAs are. So the top three expenditures of those DTL funds are devices in the classroom, professional learning for teachers, and access to software and applications to support. So it's not just getting devices, and it's not just professional learning, but it's all of those elements. Each LEA is required to submit a new plan, and so it's not one plan that goes on in perpetuity. But beginning with this first cohort was every 3 years, and now it's at every 5 years. So they'll submit a new plan that addresses where they are to continue to leverage that funding in the most effective way for them.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions for Todd?
I'm just praying that an EMP doesn't hit, because that's the number one concern from the DOD, and I just want these students to be resilient enough that they aren't dependent on digital technology, right, and can rebuild, right? Because that's a real concern. So. Yeah.
So LEAs are super appreciative of the funding, so thank you.
Students,
I would just point, if you are on Twitter and you're interested in following some of the things that we do, up on top is our hashtag. So if you'd like to see some of our visits, each visit we go on, we highlight some of their great work and post pictures, and that's at hashtag DTL Utah, so you can follow along and read their stories.
Or follow the LEAs.
Yeah. Well, you have to. You're digital. You have to be on Twitter.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. We have 3 more action items. I'm wondering if people need a break. Okay, I was supposed to remember that this time. So how about, is 5 minutes enough? Perfect. Hey, and then I think some are out of donuts if anybody wants to take that. I'm not sure. I've been smelling them.
Oh,
it could be bread or something else. It could be vegetables. You're going to yeah.
Terry is going to come and speak to
which one?
I'll let him know.
Oh, okay.
But I told him I wasn't going to
Oh, no, we have more than 3. No, we have 3. Okay.
So the one after.
So, yeah.
I'll give you heads up.
There's some comments.
Yeah, there's a lot of worry about. Yeah,
I don't.
Especially rural schools.
He's probably hearing more from the superintendent than I am from the school board members.
We had some staff doing site visits and they got some feedback from now.
Okay.
Specifically. So.
I'm sure if we could open it up to anybody.
If there's a chocolate one,
There's chocolate.
There's chocolate into from parents.
Say that again.
We get a lot of your same concerns that you bring up from parents, like, well, are you using it too much? But when we invite them to come in, because I'll invite them, just come in and let's go on a school tour. And it's not. It's very intentional. Like when I see our teachers at the elementary level using the technology, it's usually during a blended learning rotational type of thing.
I'm sorry.
And so the teachers may be doing some intense direct instruction to a small group. Another small group might be on technology. Another small group might be just doing some quad group learning. And these groups will rotate. And that's when the tool comes in really handy.
Yeah.
Because they can then use the software to be personalized to them.
I can see it.
But again, that elementary, we get that.
That's where
they have to use they do have to learn to write. They do have to there's actually studies out that show that we should be teaching cursive in kindergarten.
I was in the meeting.
I don't know if you've read that, but but it makes sense to me because when you look at child development and they're doing circles and they're drawing circles, when we teach them,
it's the same thing you do with crawling. You're using it's just.
But yet in the same teacher, we teach it third, and then it's hard to. We just add, but we don't take away because it's hard to take away.
That's the problem. And so a lot of kids.
There's an excellent article about information overload and why are we not. I have to find it and I'll send it. But what's important, what's not, and are we overthinking and overdoing and not focusing on the real academic.
It's interesting too because I just came back from National School Board Conference and there was a definite theme I felt, and maybe it was just because of some of the breakouts that I was choosing to go to, but the overall theme that I felt, and I was not alone in this because some of it was in the general sessions as well, was that this with as much technology that's out here, and that this is that it's in their hands. Not the devices they're using at school as much as it is their handheld devices. As much that they're using that, and as much connection as they have, there's a disconnect.
Well, and I think that's
part of physical, with talking. And
I think that's part of the mental health problem.
And they chatted. I mean, they talked about that, and they talked about the connection. Students need to connect with peers. They need to connect with teachers. They need to connect. Not just teachers, but all the personnel. So that minute that student gets on the bus, there's an interaction that occurs. And if we miss that opportunity,
thank you. I know. Okay. Well, I think that's so good. I think that leads to the short-temperedness, the anger issues that teachers
we are seeing a lot. We're seeing, I'm in special ed, but we're seeing a rise. They're not going to give them anyway. My gosh, just would. Of course you would. Outbursts when and Cindy, but it's not. They're not all going to fit. They don't all have a disability. No. Okay, there's certain.
And I think there's an over conclusion that they're ADHD or ADD, which now we have an opioid problem, right? So how much of it is a natural development, right? Versus
thank you.
Instigation of unintended consequences with technology and overload of the sensory.
Sure. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I went to one that was really fascinating. You'd probably find it really fascinating.
I saw that face. I recognized it myself.
The kids today and the way that they're chatting today and using technology. Are we losing the art of communication?
Absolutely.
And so I was thinking yes, and I'd like to get. And she said, she pulled out data. She says language has changed drastically over time, and this has always been a concern. She went clear back to 700 AD, saying that the same kinds of things are being said. We are this young generation is changing the language. They're changing the ways we talk. They're ruining.
Well, it ruins tradition, right?
And it's changing traditions. And so she pulled all this data, and she said it's really when we look at the written language, what we need to do is enhance. So instead of trying to take away the texting, for example, the emojis, which is just another form of communication, we need to teach our youth that there are a variety of ways to communicate. And so in this situation, you're communicating much differently than if you're texting. Absolutely. Or if you're going to write a dissertation, that's a wholly different form of communication. So it's broadening communication.
Right. And so this is when I bring in Jenny Gravitt, and we're talking about literature and how classical literature needs to be re-implemented into the ELA because we're missing that underlying carriage of language.
Yeah, it's not taken out. I mean, we have to. We're still on audio.
And there's a balance, right?
But we've so far swung on this side that we're missing that.
Right. All right, let's get going so we can finish our last three. Our next action item is R277733 Adult Education Programs Amendment. So we had, let's see, we had this before us before, but we had some questions and we made some changes, right? With this one?
We've never talked about it. We just pushed it forward.
We pushed it forward.
To get comments.
That's right.
And,
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. So, Brian, go ahead and talk to us about it.
Brian Olmstead, Student Support Coordinator with Adult Risk and Custody Programs. And we have draft 2, which is a lot of board member Scott Hansen's comments and some other things we saw. But as I've looked at this, I noticed, and Jeff's not here to help me on this, we actually, if you look at draft 1 and draft 2, there were some of our original changes in draft 1 that didn't make it in here.
Okay.
So you have to bring back draft 3?
So with permission, we would have a draft 3, I think, is what hopefully will land in front of the full board in May, right?
Because I wanted to ask Scott if he felt like all of his changes had been...
Actually, I went through again and I noticed that we were kind of mixed up. There was kind of no man's land between the drafts.
Some were in 1 and some were in 2.
Yes. I had a couple of questions too, and I don't know, I don't want to take a whole ton of time here, but just a few. As I scanned through line 21.
Which draft?
This is draft 2.
I'm on draft 2. Okay, so 21.
So line 21, we reference this Utah Adult Education Policy and Procedures Guide, January 2019 revision. So I went to the URL first and tried to pull that up, and even if I take out the part that's edited, it doesn't come up. So I searched for it on the website. I found it on the website, but it's dated February 2019, and it says it's ADA compliant as of 3/14. I wonder if there's a better way to reference this, because I think we're going to run into that problem continually.
And I talked to...
I hate to have a hard URL in there. If we could just say it's available on, the board's website, give them a page maybe, but not try and land them on a URL.
So our thinking is aligned.
Yes.
But Jeff says because of this incorporation of this, doing this by reference, he says we have to have the URL and we have to have the date and everything. So it's a difficult...
We're going to continually do
so it's rule writing.
Well, because
writing.
I have...
It's out of his hands. He has to follow what the state rule writing manual tells him to do. So we need to be more efficient at making sure the URL is always updated. So I'm sorry that it wasn't.
Well, but somehow then we need to flag that URL and say this is tied to a reference in rule, because that's disastrous.
I will take responsibility to talk to Jeff.
I think we lose legitimacy when we say, it needs to be this version, and then we've updated it 3 times, and so what do we refer to?
And we, Adult Ed is having assessment changes effective July 1st of this year.
On
and
federal
then
level?
Again, July 1st of 2020. And so, it's just, it will always be a...
Is there a workaround anyway, Michelle? I mean, I know what the
I don't know off the
says.
top of my head, but I will take on the responsibility to find that out
staff
for
could
you.
do is see, because this just seems like...
I will find out.
Yeah.
We'll always be behind.
It's
That's
not.
right.
Yeah.
No,
whatever we do,
we're
going to be in trouble.
Like that's assignment. You'll always be behind.
Okay.
And I know on the URL that's in here, I noticed that the SAS needs to be scratched. So we were SAS, and then we were AAEV, and now we are ARC. But that also changes.
And that only gets you to the Adult Ed page, but then it's not on the Adult Ed page. You had to search in the search bar for this manual name, and then it comes up, and I can give you the URL that it's actually under.
So we need the current URL to be correct.
So the web page also needs to be updated.
Yes.
So,
do you want Scott to send that to you?
Well, they can just search for it and find it. It's right.
I just searched in here and it didn't come up.
Yeah.
It was a page
So
not
here's
found.
And it's a funny one. It's on schools.utah.gov/file/ and then it's just a whole big long string of numbers.
Because it's on one of the tabs.
Letters.
It's on one of the tabs on the page.
But you can't see it from the the actual adult ed page. There's no tab there that says this is...
Right, this URL will bring you up to the overview.
It's not found when you go to this one.
But
right,
he
because,
gave us the right one,
because the
and
SAS,
so you can
because the
find
SAS
it.
is,
So then on that page, I still couldn't find it. Not by that name.
Okay. We're looking for policies and procedure guide.
It would be under directors and coordinators.
Oh, so there it is, policy and procedure guide.
And then
Okay,
You
you
just
took out
have
SAS
to-
and it came up.
No, well, it comes up to a page that you have to go to another tab to get to that. Yeah, so
it's
some way we
it's
got to
not
fix that.
intuitive.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's lines 21, 22, and 26. And I understand that we need to reference it.
It's 21, 22,
I will,
26.
I will look into it.
Okay. And then quickly, line 30, we have this definition of adult, which I'm not sure we ever reference, and I think it might be confusing. It says an adult is an individual over 18 years of age or older, but then we offer adult ed services to all kinds of other people who aren't over 18. We still, the emancipation thing and all that's...
The funding is different.
Okay.
And so there's a reason for that definition in there, and it's because there's different funding mechanisms. The public ed funding still covers the kids that are under 18 unless they have certain restrictions, like they have to have, the courts don't generally emancipate them. They have to have been excused from their school district. It's like in Rule 419. And so
do we actually reference adult though? Because we always say eligible adult, and then we say eligible adult who needs language services or...
mention 419 because it may be because of the reference to 419.
Okay.
So I'll look at that while you...
Okay.
You always have good things
I
that
know.
we need to look at.
Yes, great.
I appreciate it.
It's
No, I
an
really
extension of
appreciate
what I do
it.
at work sometimes, but and then just in general, we reference utopia before we define it, and if we can, we should always define it before we reference things. That's line 70. And I think this is education vernacular, the 101 contact hours.
It is. It's to
Everybody
do
understands.
with. It is also to do with Rule 419
So it's
and how
tied in.
many face-to-face hours you have to
Yeah.
count it as an education day.
Okay,
As a
I
school
understand it to be face-to-face hours as well. It's not defined in here, but I think that's probably. And then we have this entering 103, entering functional level. And that's not defined anywhere, I don't think.
Capitalized, entering functional level.
Yeah, EFLs are the way we report students.
Yeah, and this, maybe it's not fair for me to read this when I don't have all the acronyms in my head and understand what all that is, but that's another one that's
But do you think that needs to be defined, Brian?
should be defined, I think. That
Yeah, we could add that. It would become a new number 12. It would be in between ELL and fee.
Let me look and see if it's defined in our your definitions.
the separate definitions. Okay. And then 126 through 128. So we're in the definition section. It talks about other eligible adult education students. But then it talks about the superintendent prorating and providing credits for funds generated. And I think that belongs in 773-6. That's not a definition. That's directing the superintendent to provide funding. Can you see that? Is that
right, because the 14 is other eligible adult education student.
Yeah, I just think it needs to be moved.
Tell me the line number again.
126.
126 to 128. Because we shouldn't be directing anything in the definition.
Yeah,
section.
that's, yeah.
Then I had a question about an HSE testing center. Is that something is that separate from these adult ed facilities?
Yes.
They have to go
Yeah,
somewhere?
so a common one that I'm familiar with is the BYU Testing Center.
Mhm.
So they'll administer, our state chosen HSE right now is the GED.
Okay.
It's not the only option, but it's the state option right now. So you can take your GED at any of those testing
Does
centers.
someone have to approve that? I assume it's
Yeah, so there's a whole board rule about
Okay, maybe we should
HSE.
reference that or else define it, what that testing center is.
So are you seeing that?
I saw it on line 135.
Okay.
And then on line 218, we have something about carryover funds, and we addressed this in another rule where the superintendent, the LEA may carry over 10% or 50,000, whichever is less. We cut that out and said 10% on the
Right,
other
that's
ones.
one that didn't make it from draft one.
It's
fixed in draft one. Which line? Which line?
So that
218.
one's on 218.
Yes, yeah, that's, yep.
Okay, and then 226, we said if they're going to be able to carry over a lot of money, the superintendent shall consider excess funds instead of may.
I think we had that in.
I thought we had it too.
In draft one.
I didn't go back
and then also on 229 is the same.
Same thing.
Yeah.
I think it is too.
Yeah, and I didn't go back and cross-reference that, but it's the 10 or 50 is again on. You're right on 229.
Yeah, it's fixed in draft.
That was the first reason for opening this rule.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then. So then we get into the accounting part of it. I just wanted to understand. So 990 clock hours of membership means that
180 days, 5.5 hours. Okay. That's where you get that.
Okay. And that's different than the contact hours that we talked about.
Yes. So if you have like a home and hospital student, in order for you to consider them still enrolled, because if a student doesn't attend school for 10 consecutive days, after that you have to disenroll them. And you can't count them anymore. So a home and hospital student who, let's say they had cancer and they were having treatment for 6 weeks, you can't send a teacher to their house for 5.5 hours every single day. That would overwhelm them physically.
Right. Yeah.
And so instead what they do is collect their work for the different classes, and they have someone who is an educator meet with that student either in person or like through FaceTime for 2 hours.
Okay.
So that's the contact hours, is you have to have a minimum of contact hours during a week. During that 2 hours, they're giving them much more work than you would normally get in 2 weeks, and saying, and I'll be back on Thursday, and on Thursday when I come back, anything that you have questions about, I'll work with you on that. So if they provide those contact hours, the kid gets to stay counted as being enrolled in that LEA.
So they count that as they interpolate
as
that to
going
clock
alternate,
hours somehow, right?
It is not clocked hours, but attendance. That they're counted in membership.
That's what I was trying to figure
They're
out.
counted
So
in
it says
membership.
WPU funding at the student at the rate of 990 clock hours, which is standard
Right,
for
as a
schools,
full-time
right?
student. They're counted as a full-time student.
Okay, but then it doesn't talk about contact hours in this pupil accounting section. I just wanted to understand how they did that because I thought about that. There's kids that probably aren't
You have
attending.
good questions Jeff wrote this one, so I will go back and work with him, and we will get those issues. They're very important issues. We need to get the connection between.
If it's not important, just tell me it's not important, and we'll move on to the next part. But I don't.
To make sure it's connected so that you can see those contact hours mattered to the clock hours mattered to when we do accounting, and I'll relook at it so that
that's
if there's a better connection.
249 is where it just talks about clock hours. I mean, it's just the standard accounting, I think. It's written in there. 268 references FTE, and I didn't see a definition of that
full-time equivalent
anywhere. So if that's just something that I should understand, then that's fine. But
which line number is that?
That's on 268.
Yeah, we shouldn't put acronyms without giving you the initial statement of what it is. Correct.
Yeah, and then 289 talks about Carnegie units. I understand what that is. I just didn't know if is it just credit hours? Is that, do we need to call it Carnegie units?
In high school completion, I think we have those, that's what we refer to.
On top, if I may interject, Member Hanson, on top of the Carnegie units, are we also implementing the microcredentialing and experience that they've had that would go towards credit or graduation or anything like that?
Those would be credits, right?
But I don't think high school diploma has the microcredentialing. It's the same
So like recognizing an adult work that they've done outside yet. So And that goes back to the policy and procedure guide. It speaks to how programs can bring a student in and recognize those things and turn them into awarded credit.
Okay.
So if you
so they can have
say you dropped out, now you're 35 years old, and in between you've done some industry certifications.
Right.
You could bring those, and they would appropriately,
Okay.
Okay, then 315 says that Utah Gold Ed program shall offer courses consistent with the, and it says elementary and secondary general core. Are we offering elementary level classes in adult ed?
That's just the name of that board rule.
Okay, so that's it. All right.
Yeah.
And then it says the core standards on 316 and 17 may be modified or adjusted to meet individual needs. Does someone need to authorize modifications, or who can do that? The teacher?
Usually it's the counselor, or if it's through an IEP for a student who's still in the age K through age 21.
So it talks about IEPs further down, and I understand that.
It's one of the ways you can modify them. The other one is through a school counselor or administrator.
So does this need to be tightened up at all to say who can modify it, or is it just...
Don't in the other rule for public school, because that same language is in the high school completion language for K-12 as well.
So we're okay with the teacher then?
And we leave, no, teachers don't. No. We just,
So
in practice and training, when you do the counselor, when the guidance counselors are trained, when administrators are trained, they know which things they have to do to make it so that, for example, a student, if I change certain credits, they're not going to be eligible for college things in the NCAA. So there's a certain set of people who have learned these are okay things for you to change and these are not okay.
If that's the case, then we should say something in the rule about who can and can't. I'd hate for a teacher to be in trouble for modifying something when we say it can be modified.
Well, teachers don't get to choose the enrollment of a student, and so in order to change it, you'd have to change what classes those students in high school or in adult ed were taking.
So the counselor then...
So a teacher doesn't choose that.
Yeah. So the counselor is someone who could do that.
Yes, because they assign them to the class and enroll them through the...
Maybe no danger then.
I've noticed that too, the student schedule.
Um, 333, there's just a typo consistent with core standards instead of core standards. And then we use 24.0 credits in some places and 24 credits in others. It's just a placeholder consistency. That's 333 and 340.
And see, in draft 1, it's fixed.
Yeah.
Core standards.
And then I just need an explanation on 371. So an adult education program should provide instruction that allows a student to transition between sites in a seamless manner. So what does that mean? Sites inside an LEA?
So a large portion, I guess that's fair to say, of adult education is in the correction setting.
Okay.
And so they're a highly mobile population. And so that's just speaking about that transition from site to site within the adult education community.
Okay.
That we need to be connected as a system. We shouldn't be so disparate that as a person moves from one to the other, it does not help them.
So they don't move on semester breaks, I'm sure, or term breaks.
We try to facilitate that. Now, some of the transferring is outside of our responsibility.
But so does this mean there should be standard curriculum inside an LEA or across LEAs, or?
In the adult ed program, I don't know that their curriculum, that you have an approved curriculum for every English class, but they have to look at what the standards are for high school graduation.
Right.
Because I'm providing them an equivalent education to what a student who's graduating from high school is getting.
Okay.
So I know that they still need to look at your state standards that you chose as a board. They don't get to just work totally outside of that, so that if they're incarcerated and they go to school year-round when they're incarcerated and earn lots of credits, and then they haven't quite finished, but they get released, then they could go to DATC and the adult ed program and complete it. But I don't know if that answers what you're saying in the transition.
Transition between sites in a seamless manner. And I can see some guy in the middle of War and Peace for a book report, and he transfers to another place, and they're reading something else.
Right.
What does it mean to transfer in a seamless?
Yeah, their education is a pretty individualized program.
And perhaps having this in board rule is maybe a little inappropriate. It's more program guidance. This is stuff that this is similar to what's in our policy and procedure manual. Is we have responsibilities and we also have guidance.
Well, an easy transition is one thing. This is seamless manner, and seamless means he should pick up the next day right where he left off. And I don't think we can do that.
Should that come out and just be in your procedures, or does that need to be?
It could easily. It's very common with the type of language we speak about for the program.
Are you covered in the program if they make a motion to take it out?
Absolutely.
So would one of you want to make a motion that out, or do you want to?
Yeah, and let me ask this. Is this a timely one, or could this be something, it sounds like there's a lot of questions, combine draft 1 and 2, fix the problems and bring back draft 3. Is that something we could do?
Absolutely.
And could we direct that, or do we need to make a motion to do that?
That could just be your action to send it back.
I
don't know if we've collected all of.
But have you been collecting?
I have written down all of the suggestions.
Okay, and you've been writing them down.
Yep.
Okay,
I've
so
recorded those. I think you might have more though.
I just have a question.
so as long as you guys are writing down, then we will direct that. Are you okay with that, Scott?
Yes, that would be great. If it's not time sensitive, we can just come back and.
We want to get it right.
We're trying to make it right.
These are great.
You giving me your notes so that I'm sure
that I can hand you these notes, and I'm sorry for not contacting you ahead of time. My schedule sometimes gets away with me, and I'm up, the night before or the 2 nights before, and I know that's not an excuse. It's my lack of planning. But
I would welcome your
here
notes.
I am.
That would be great.
What I got. So, 429 is the next one.
429.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is about funding, and it says the superintendent shall distribute supplemental support. Just reading that, I don't understand what supplemental support is.
So above in the first, or those subsections, is that what they're called? Or subsections, number 1, 426, 27, 28.
Yeah.
In the guide, it speaks about the distribution of the funds. We use 3% of our funds are set aside for supplemental purposes.
Okay.
And so then this now is speaking of that supplemental support.
Okay, so the guide just says there'll be supplemental support set aside.
3% of the funds are set aside, and then this speaks to how that is.
Okay, so we're going outside I know we've incorporated that guide into the rule.
Right.
We're going outside the rule back to the guide, and then we're saying that supplemental support should be distributed this way. Okay, I don't know. That one's. I'm sure it's clear to you guys who deal with it every day, but I didn't follow. Maybe that's okay. I'll leave that.
Do you think it's better just all in the guide?
You guys, maybe we just say it should be distributed according to, funding should be distributed according to the guide. And leave it
In
to
terms
the
of
guide.
that, better check with the law and make sure that
See what
the
it
law
says.
doesn't require that part.
Because it gets into this discussion about.
So what this speaks to is there are very tiny programs across the state. And so they have access to the supplemental funds first.
Yeah. Can I ask, is this duplicating the language in the guide, in the rule?
Well, we're trying to not do that, so I believe this language is only in the rule.
Okay.
That's why there was the big section that was struck out. It's because that's all in the guide about.
Okay.
Yeah.
And would it make sense to have this in the guide, or does this need to be in the rule?
That's, I guess, if we can determine if it needs to be rule-based, or if it could be in the guide, then it would all be together.
I guess I would think the preference would be to have just go to one source and then be able to understand what it you need to do instead of flipping back and forth. But whatever the best way to handle that, I just didn't, reading through this, I didn't understand what the supplemental was, and I didn't go to the guide. I think that's it. all I had. Thank you for your patience with me. But I will make a
motion. Thank you for your comments.
Okay, do you want to make that?
And
wait, should we see if were there any other things that committee members were worried about or concerned? Okay, yes, go ahead and make that motion.
I will move that we direct staff to incorporate draft 1 and 2 and the changes we've discussed today into a draft 3 to bring before the committee to be adopted.
Including,
to the board.
Well, and you made some changes, including changes recommendation, yeah.
Yeah, including ones from today's meeting.
Okay, so the motion for the committee is to direct staff to incorporate draft 1 and draft 2 and incorporate other changes made in today's committee meeting. Any discussion of that motion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries.
And that will be back to the May committee.
Yes.
Okay.
I have one more question for you, which is related to this. Can a homeschooler just go in and take a high school equivalency exam without being in adult ed?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
Who has to approve that?
Depends on their
age.
Depends on their age. So if you're
their LEA has to,
if you're
they're under 16, they're
then you
eligible.
have to go in to an adult ed program and have an assessment that shows you have the capability of passing the HSE.
Okay, under 16, but over 16?
17 and over.
I could just walk in off the street and say, hey, I want to sign up for it.
So this, if you're still K-12 eligible, so that's most 17, 18-year-olds, your cohort hasn't graduated, you need to go into an adult ed program, well, actually a release from your K-12 system. And it's a waiver, just acknowledging that if you pass the high school equivalency,
you can't loop back into
you
school.
can't circle back around. Because it ends FAPE.
Okay, so what if I'm done? FAPE's been done, and I'm over 18. I haven't got a degree. I don't have a high school degree. I could just walk in and take the test.
$120.
There's actually now 3 different types of high school equivalent tests. The GED is not the only one any longer. So.
But not in Utah.
Oh, not in Utah. I
Right.
thought it had already expanded in Utah.
So Utah has our high school equivalency board rule, and through that, through an RFP process, we select a provider. So we have a high school equivalency exam provider, and we've chosen GED. We have a 5-year contract with GED.
Okay.
And so at the end of that period, because there are, the 3, and there's just got back from the national conference.
Okay.
There are other providers starting to play in that space. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much
Thank you.
for your answer.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we're on to action item 6.7, R277462. It's the Comprehensive Counseling and Guidance Program. There were changes in House Bill 181, so we had to change so we can get the money for the Perkins 5. So I'll let Leah Voorhees and Kim. Go ahead, talk to us.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee. So just very quick background. You probably, when you saw this, thought, wow, the majority of this was deleted. Okay.
And then you kept scrolling.
Yes, you have to scroll along.
Yes.
So this rule was up for renewal anyway, 5-year renewal, but it had a ton of outdated language. So we just started over. So if you skip to where the actual language starts again, which is line 262, okay, then it's almost the identical rule. It meets the requirements of how to write rules according to the Administrative Rule Writing Manual. Thank you. And substantively, there are almost no changes. Okay. However, since playing with this rule for now 2 months, we actually recognized that there are 2 very small changes that we would like to recommend to this version. Would you like to hear those now, Chair?
Please.
Okay, I'm going to have Kim explain those.
So if I can draw your attention to line 326 and 327, it talks about our review cycle, and that happens every 6 years.
In the past, it was in conjunction with LEA's accreditation review, and that's where the 6 years came. And we don't intend to change that right now, but I was wanting to strike out in conjunction with the accreditation review in case we need to change the review cycle, that we have more flexibility.
So we just read at least once every 6 years.
A review would be conducted to follow these parameters.
Okay, just take out.
So,
once every 6 years.
Qualified LEA shall, at least once every 6 years. No, that's on this. Participate in on-site.
Would it be at least once every 6 years
Shall.
conduct an LEA's accreditation review?
No,
No.
it's participate.
You have to go
so
up
it's
higher.
participate.
Mm-hmm.
Participate in online program review conducted by superintendent, which shall be conducted at least once every 6 years.
Yeah, so couldn't you just stop after 6
Yeah,
years?
I just want to say be conducted at least once every 6 years.
Period.
And
okay.
And you don't
and
need a
assess
rule of
the following
reference.
components, etc. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
The next line is, it's actually not in the prior rule or the current rule, but we really want to match what we're asking of LEAs to rule with compliance.
Good.
And we asked LEAs to do a self-evaluation annually. Then they do a 3-year internal review through their own LEA, and then they do a 6-year formal with the superintendents. So I am asking that we add a line around line 335. So add a new line that states
So this would be after letter D?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
As part of the review cycle, each school counseling program will perform an annual performance self-evaluation, or conduct an annual performance self-evaluation.
Can you repeat that again?
As part of the review cycle, each school counseling program will conduct an annual performance self-evaluation.
Norlie, did you get that?
No, just the last part, where school conduct an annual
performance self-evaluation.
And you got school counseling program, right?
So we'll have her read it again.
Okay.
Norlie, would you be okay to reread that?
Well, it says, okay, for 335, you're going to add, it says, as part of the review, each school will conduct an annual performance self-evaluation. Okay.
But not school.
Each school counseling program.
Each school
counseling,
program.
okay.
And do you want it to say the review cycle?
I think we could take out the cycle because it's just an annual.
Okay.
But thank you for clarifying that.
Okay, maybe one more time just to make sure we got it. Okay. That's all right.
Okay, as part of review, each school, I still got that, conducting program, conduct annual performance self-evaluation.
Did you have a school counseling program?
Count that's what, okay.
Each school counseling
program. Will conduct an annual performance self-evaluation.
Yes.
Nice.
Good. Okay.
So, Chair, we're happy to answer any questions.
Do any of you have questions or?
Well, I have concerns. I understand the counseling or the college and career readiness school counseling program that is referenced in there in blue, that you highlighted in blue. It's on line. What's wrong with it? Oh, it's on line 275. Is what you want to, or is that not it? The plan for college and career readiness. Is that, am I referencing the right one, or is this a different program?
You're talking
No,
275 and 276.
This is the process. So it's those individual and group meetings for the plan and college and career readiness process, where they developed their 4-year plans. They talk about careers and goals. So
Right.
that's
Yeah,
so within the program.
Okay, And so the counseling program model, the second edition that was released in 2016, that's in conjunction with this, they work in tandem.
Yeah, so that was in line. That's part of starting on line 308. Talks about that the rule incorporates the school counseling program model.
Okay. So this was written in 2016, but my name's on it. My concern is the social justice part of it and the resource that was used to implement social justice throughout the program, and that the parents in the model is not close to the student, but is actually further on the outside. So there's two separate things: the social justice and not incorporating parents enough. From my own personal experience, I was kept out of the dark until I pushed my way through to understand what the college and career pathway my son was taking, right? Because I was never invited, right? I was never incorporated. Then there's the social justice part where it talks about a specific group trumping another, and on a constitutional basis, that's not equal justice, right? That's not having equality or equity in all student success. So I have serious issue with that document alone, and so until that's corrected, those two items are corrected, where parents are more involved in the college and career counseling program with their student, being brought in all the time, and then that social justice part removed.
Do either of you want to respond to that? Because from personal experience, I know parents they are invited, but let me respond
and I
to that.
feel like I hate to hear those stories of sometimes the individuals in practice when it overshadows our framework of what
if you
is
read
the
the framework,
right? The intent is, we know through research that the parent is the number one influencers of a child's choice, and we want to incorporate them in everything. And it's actually written in statute, which we support in the rules, that a parent is invited and engaged in all of those meetings. And we really check that through our compliancy reviews of how. So they have to.
Compliancy needs to be updated. So, because it's not happening. And in fact, I've had teachers influence my students I was dismissed. But a teacher influenced my student to actually take his class in lieu of a required class and do the packets. Do you want to tell me how upset I was? And the counselor, it was equally helpful. But they're not following the rules or the laws. So.
Could I, just a related question, I'm looking at line 382, and that's talking about the college career readiness plan. It includes some conference meetings. It says at least one individual and one group conference meeting during, and it has the grades. Could we, or should we, say who's involved in that group conference? Because if that said parents, I assume that's who's supposed to be there with the kids.
It does say right above in 377 that we encourage,
parental involvement.
So parental involvement is up above, and then we document that parental involvement, so then we can make recommendations of how to encourage more. So they report their percentages of parents attending those meetings, and we look for if those are low.
I understand that and read it. Where we say group conference, I think it would be helpful maybe to say group conference involving the parents.
I like that. Could strengthen it even more.
Yeah,
add that.
So be there, and then that's
in 382.
Yeah.
So if you're seeing those percentages, what are you seeing? Are parents coming, or is there still a huge lack of parental involvement that we still need to do more?
I always think we always need to do more in engaging our parents. I don't want to speculate on an average participation rate, but I have done, like Davis, for example, I did their full comprehensive reviews last year and attended every secondary school, and they averaged above an 80% parental attendance for their.
It's good to know.
And that's what I guess for my school. The majority of parents come.
Right.
But you have some who just don't, even though we send stuff home.
Right. And what we find, it's funny because school counselors are so intent on involving those parents. 80 is not sufficient. And when we talk about strategies to even engage in them more, and we're actually trying to be more creative and trying to find other avenues. So I know Summit Academy, their parents are very respondent to technology, and they've been conducting Zoom meetings to engage their parents because they're working families and they want to find other ways to access their parents rather than if they can't make that face-to-face meeting. So they're taking it even a step further. And so part of our review document talks about a multi-tier systems of support for engaging parents. So we may have a letter that goes out to all parents. That's not enough. What is that next step? A personal invite for a phone call. Maybe we have a Spanish-speaking student. We need to have a translator call and invite that parent. So we talk about that multi-tier system of engaging our parents.
Okay. Then I would say that the next thing would be then to maybe change this. Right. And because families on the outside, when they should be closer to the counselor and the student on the inside.
And you know, it's sad that the graph doesn't capture the intent of meeting every level of supports for a student. What the intent behind a systemic approach is that you can't just work with the student alone. You have to be working with your community and partnering with your agencies. You have to be engaging your parents. You have to, like in our advisory committees, we invite business leaders to engage in what skills we need to prepare our students in for careers in college and that skills gap that we're seeing. So what the intent behind that is that are you finding interventions at every level? And it's sad that it goes outward like this because it's all equally important. And we do not stress that it's not, that's a
final.
Well, yes, like a hierarchy.
Okay.
Yes.
It's like a big hug to me.
But if you read the language in there, the language explains the levels of support, and I am more than happy to look at that graphic if that is not.
I think graphics need to support the language that's in there, and if they're not,
it's a good insight.
It's sending two different mixed messages. So
thank you. That's great feedback.
Janet.
I have a question for you. It goes to, I guess, starting on line 446. Here it says accountability and reporting. So we're talking here about a new LEA, and I'm assuming that refers to charter schools in general because we don't often have a new district in the state.
It actually, too, refers to bringing on new schools to an approved counseling program. Okay. So like for Washington School District, we'll be bringing on 2 new schools next year. Okay. So they'll go through the new program, even though they're approved.
So they won't be, well,
but yeah.
They wouldn't be, Washington District would be the LEA.
Correct.
Even though, so new schools. All right. But my question is about a new LEA that does not meet the school counselor to student ratio described in section R277-462.6 may receive a funding distribution after 2 years of planning, training, and program implementation. Tell me about that funding.
Yeah, so if you look at our funding allocation, student ratio is part of that. And with a new school coming on board, if there are things that are not in place that go against the rule, we give them a year to try to bring that into compliance. And so they're considered on probation, and then we give them recommendations, and then when they bring that back, we go out for a review, and then they can become an approved program and we start receiving funding. So we work with them to become in compliance before we give them new money.
And where does that funding, what's the source of that funding?
Our funding stream comes through CTE add-on dollars. And it is for 7 through 12, grades 7 through 12. So if you notice in the rule, even though we support, of course, we know prevention is important, we would love for more ideas of how to get funding.
Well, I know when I read this, I thought, because we were always going to the legislature and we were always saying, we need more counselors, our student to counselor ratio is terrible. And they solved the problem by passing a law saying, you have to have this ratio. No funding, And so you just scratch your head. So I wanted to know if there was some funding.
Well, the good thing too is
he listens.
Yeah, so Jeff Van Holten and I have had some really good conversations with the superintendency, and basically what we're saying is, so ratios has always been in place, and we report those to the board every year, and there have been some LEAs who are out of compliance, and it's a really hard call to pull funding when you're not fully funding them. But the messaging behind this increased money for mental health supports is that LEAs should be strategic and look at ways to become in compliance with this new money, and that way we could hold them to the fire a little more. If you're out of ratios for your school counselor, maybe that should be a priority in your plan to look at, could you bring those into compliance with that new money? So that's just an idea through this new funds.
Counselor/school nurse.
Right, but that's their choice of how to utilize that money, and that could be the conversation with those new funds.
Dan,
You want to speak?
I think it's important to point out too, Kim, you correct me if I'm wrong, the funding that comes through CTE for this program doesn't actually fund counselors. It's the program.
Yeah.
And it might hire a comprehensive guidance clerk and other services that are associated with it, but the LEA is still funding the counselor through their FTE.
And that is a really good point, and the reason that money came out was to support really the career literacy piece, and that's why you'll see that career literacy piece supporting that plan for College and Career Ready very strong.
And you can see that really simply in -7. That's really where the funds.
Okay. So then let's look for a minute about the annual report that each school district and public school shall make an annual report to patrons on its activities under this schedule. So I'm presuming that means somewhere they will be reporting what their student to counselor ratio is.
Yes, and
can we see that?
We get that every.
You do, and I don't remember last year, but I think you chaired the committee when I reported the ratios, and we had a really good discussion around what do we do when the schools are not in compliance. And so this year, this will be on the May docket for the school ratios, and it'll come back to this committee. So.
Terry Shoemaker, I believe you wanted to say something about this.
I did.
Come on up to the table.
You want to be Linda Hanson?
I'll be Linda, if that's okay.
Linda's fine with that.
Linda's pretty awesome. I don't think I can qualify to be her. But
She is pretty awesome.
if you'll give me a couple minutes on this, it really goes to the last thing we were just talking about.
Okay.
So for a long, long time, it's been several years that the rule has required 1 to 350. But how many districts do it? You have the data?
I do. This year we've asked for five LEAs will have to submit a ratio plan. And that includes
Only 5?
Correct.
Only 5 schools then?
No, we report by LEA.
Yeah. So it's many more schools than 5.
Correct. And I do have the data in my report.
Yeah.
You want me to pull that up?
Well, that would be helpful maybe for this conversation. Because the reason I'm bringing this up is that for the longest time, this 1 to 350 is a requirement, but not a one that you were going to actually possibly remove funding from. Now, so if you go to the end of your proposed thing, there are consequences associated with not meeting this rule. So that suddenly is a whole different ballgame as it relates to 1 to 350 versus where we are in some places that are clearly beyond 1 to 350. Okay? So the corrective action plan could include the loss of minimum school funds. Now that's never happened in relation to this as it relates to this 1 to 350, ever, because there hasn't been funding attached to this particular program, which has been part of the problem. This isn't about, my conversation with you isn't really about what's the right thing. The right thing is at least 1 to 350 and probably less than that by a long ways.
Yes,
that's the right thing.
Recommendation from the American School Counseling Association is 1 to 250.
Yeah. Okay. So we're way off even at 1 to 350, but we don't receive any funds for 1 to 250, 350, or 450. Okay. So that's part of the problem here. I want you to seriously consider, how hard you're going to go after school districts. Now, I'm just down in finance, and yes, we were talking about House Bill 373, and that $16 million is going to get reduced immediately to 12. Okay. Based on other things. So suddenly the additional money, instead of 16 being available that could be used towards that, we're going down to 12. And yes, maybe I can see school districts wanting to comply with this. If this ends up becoming the law, they're certainly going to have to do with that. But you're going to hear back from districts. That's why I'm having this conversation with you today. Okay? You're going to hear back from districts. You've got an unfunded mandate, a really unfunded mandate that you've introduced here, even though it's been in place for how long? 1 to 350 has been in place for how long? Quite a while.
I've been in this field for
long time.
over 15 years, and it's been in place since
long time. And so what we did was we did this for 15 years. Okay, someday maybe we'll get the funding for it.
Educate me though. Is the 1 to 350? Is that by statute, or is the rule the only place?
I believe it's in statute.
I think it is in statute.
I don't know for sure, Scott,
so
on that.
We don't have latitude.
No, I don't think you do, and I'm not saying that you need to change that. What I'm saying you need to do is be careful about the consequences because of the lack of funding. Okay?
Right.
And now, we're going to have the 16, maybe 12 now, as we were listening to finance earlier. And then the next year it goes to 26. I think you need to have, they've always given leeway, and they've always had corrected plans for a long time to try and move towards 1 to 350. It's not that school districts don't want to do this. Districts don't have the same ability to do it everywhere. They don't have necessarily the taxing ability that some districts have in one place versus another, and that's a whole long conversation. So I'm asking you to be thoughtful about, the notion of compliance and how far we're going to do that as it relates to when we audit this. And we see that there's still, we talked about 5 LEAs, that's school districts probably, okay? And which means that they have probably multiple schools, probably, okay? So, we're talking hundreds of thousands of additional dollars, likely.
What are the numbers?
So 65 schools, correct?
63.
Okay, but we don't measure by school, we measure by LEA, right? That's how we're
right.
Them. So what are the numbers? What's the ratio in those schools that aren't compliant?
Oh, I would have to go back and...
Well, I know some are 1 to 400. I know that for sure.
I just did have an overall report for me. I can find that information for you.
We're at one of those, and we got the email that said that we're out of compliance, but we're also in the growth. So sometimes you got allocation of priorities and funding. It's not that you don't want to, but and so the plan is, okay, well, how are you going to get there? Well, it may not be for a while, but
so Kim or Leah, what would happen if a school, what is the plan? What would happen if a school didn't?
So they submit a plan of what they would be doing to come in.
But they wouldn't lose money right away?
No. Okay. And now it'd be up to the board. So that's why we bring those to you as a board. You evaluate what's the situation.
Okay. Like there's growth.
There's growth or, yes.
And that would be up to us whether or not we take away that funding.
Correct. Well, you would even do a corrective action plan before funding would be removed. So you would make suggestions. You would come up with a suggested strategic plan that they would need to meet by your deadline too before they would lose funding.
Because the plan is they need more money. I mean, it's hard.
Yeah, so I just wanted you to be aware it's the right thing to do. We don't have the funding to do it.
Right.
And so be careful about punishing. That's really all I'm asking.
Is this?
Go ahead.
Excuse me. Is this time sensitive? No.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because of
HB. Because of HB 181. Yeah.
You could split the continuation from the amendment if you wanted.
Can I ask also on charter schools? Sorry. So
Jeff.
Small charter schools, it says if they require less than a quarter of a school counselor, then they can be considered compliant.
They do a 0.25 variance, and it just allows. So if they're like 355 to 1, they're still being compliant. So it just gives them a little bit of a variance.
So does every small charter school have to have at least one counselor?
If they're in an approved program, they do have to have a licensed school counselor within that 1 to 350 ratio for an approved school counselor.
And they may only have 125
Even if
kids.
they've only got 125 kids, that's my question.
That they could do. So a lot of those do point. They will. Yeah, part-time. So they may split between schools. They may have other functions within their school, but the portion of time would account for their population.
Okay.
And that's similar to Manila and Daggett is the same way. The counselor has some other responsibilities, but her portion of time serves her students.
As it should.
And that was the other thing I wanted to say to you. The school counselors in the very smallest school districts typically, and you just emphasize that, have multiple responsibilities. And so, yeah.
Yeah, that
so
85%.
We're just asking, and I'll sit down after the back over here, that you be careful about the punishment side of this thing, the consequence side of this, because it has been a large unfunded mandate that school districts have been working on for quite some time.
And I want to thank you, Superintendent Shoemaker, because we want to advocate for supports for students.
Yes.
We don't want to pull minimal supports for students when it's not fully funded. So thank you for your advocacy.
Okay, I think
before you, I may have
is
a
she okay to go
question
first? Or?
I'm sorry.
Oh, I just had a question for Leah. So you have rewritten this new rule because this is repeal and reenact.
Yeah,
is this part that talks about a corrective action plan different from what was in the previous rule?
Yes and yes.
Yeah.
Yes and no. Okay. Oh, there you go.
That's the problem with the rewrite. We can't see
So,
exactly what changed.
The original rule that that the deleted section up front does require a corrective plan.
Because I think I've read those plans.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the plan was never, what I did in this rule when I rewrote it, is connected that to Rule 114, which is the corrective action plan generally.
That's the difference.
That's the difference. A corrective plan that was kind of undefined, and I just attached it to the corrective action plan rule that you have. Having never really dealt with the former plans and what they look like, I don't know if this would be dramatically different in terms of what is typically required in Rule 114.
And you're saying that's the difference. Tell us what makes the difference.
Jeff, he was there when we talked about this on Wednesday. The answer is yes, it is dramatically different, but it's understandable. Okay? I mean, it's been in place. The rule, the 1 to through 50, has been in place for a long time. But again, once again, it's a unfunded mandate that, frankly, districts have been working on, and we still have, 63-something schools that you were just talking about that are not there yet, and some it's going to take quite a bit of money for them to get them there.
But ultimately, it would come back here, and we would make that decision whether or not to.
If you go down this way, going back to 114, because that consequence plan, or what do you call it, the corrective action plan, okay, clearly outlines a series of steps.
Yeah.
And the end step is that you could remove minimum school program
But that's
funds.
the right thing to do, to tie it into something concrete. And then
I don't disagree with that.
And then we've got the discretion at the end to say,
They're
know what,
making an effort,
they're
they're
making
doing this.
best efforts under the situation, but to have it be ambiguous about what should come to the board, it makes sense to tighten that up.
If you're going to tighten it up, that's probably the right thing to do. The question is, at what point do you decide, do you put it in the rule here that we recognize? Do you say anything about an unfunded mandate?
Yeah.
Is that something even worth putting in here? I don't know the answer to that question. But it would be wrong for me to advocate for school boards and superintendents and not bring this issue, because we've lived with it for a long time. We've made lots of progress with it. And I personally have been an advocate for school counseling at the secondary and the elementary level. But until we have additional funds to get there, we would ask you to be careful with your compliance.
And that is something that just doesn't play at the legislature. They just have not been willing to give funds for counseling.
Lisa and then Scott.
Well, and that brings me to Representative Elison's bill. How much of that influences the counselors and goes to that problem?
Well, every school district that receives their portion of it, remember, they have to provide a match. There's a 1-to-1 match in that too. Okay, so it isn't
free money.
No.
Yeah.
But the likelihood of them meeting the match is probably not is high.
Yeah.
Okay, because they already have counselors, so they'll likely receive the match part. But the dollar amount may not get very far in respect to the problem we were just talking about with the 63 schools. Okay, but it's going to help. It's going to move it in that direction if a school district chooses to write their plan for a secondary school counselor. If you move the Rule 114 connection to this, which is what is in this proposed rule, that could motivate some districts and some schools to move in that direction. But it also may minimize, I need to tell you this, it may minimize maybe some other kinds of things that are necessary that they're thinking about for mental health issues at a particular school. That's the other side of that conversation.
And that could also be a decision-making factor for you. If you saw that the rationale and need was for a social worker, then maybe you wouldn't choose to do a corrective action plan because you're looking at student supports.
Right.
But can I would like some feedback from the board. Current practice is that the ratio plans come in the form of a letter.
Yeah.
Would it be easier for the board to evaluate that plan if it had more of a template form of questions that
I think so. I don't know what the committee thinks.
Yes, I think so.
And that kind of goes to where I think the way, so right now, big emphasis on school mental health, school counselors, we've been going along for years, it sounds like, way lower than the ratios we should have. The way, if we keep going the way we have and not bringing this to the surface, nothing's going to change. So bring it to the board, present a corrective action plan, tell us there's no money, and tell us why there's no money, and then let us compile all that stuff, and next legislative session we go in and say, look, we've got all these LEAs that couldn't do this because they don't have enough funds, and this is what they're doing with the money they got. You know, I think that gives us ammunition to go in rather than just push it under the table and say we don't have enough counselors.
Well,
I think that's the right way to do
it.
And
I think with this new template that LEAs have been asked to do, a line item where that money is going, so we can visibly see where that'll help. That'll help.
And hopefully the template says, what are you funding, or what new things have you put in place with this extra money that you got, and so we see what trade-offs they're making, and then we can compile that and use it.
Jeff,
data speaks up there on the hill, I think.
So, and I just want to what I'm about to say, I want to color it with what Terry had said, because as we look at all of the new funding sources that have come through this session, we do have to keep in mind if we motivate LEAs toward a particular type of expenditure, that always is at the expense of another, right?
Yes.
So as we think about House Bill 373, we had 16 million with some stuff coming off the top. So it'll be down around 12 distributed, and then next year it'll be more. You also have TSSA with the 98.1 million, 25% at least off the top for salaries. But the rest of it can, in the framework, go toward mental health, among other things. Again, considering the fact that if you go to mental health, it might be at the expense of other things. So there's funding coming in these new ways. And I think that's something we need to be mindful of as we move forward in taking corrective action plans. And as the board looks at creative policy ideas in terms of addressing some of these LEAs that are not able to come into compliance. I do agree, it seems very, route Peter to pay Paul in a sense of, oh, you didn't have enough counselors, so now I'm going to pull your counseling funding. That feels so counterintuitive. So we need to kind of think through some possible creative ways, whether that is making recommendations to an LEA on creative ways they could restructure all the different grants, or maybe look at what it is they're applying for and not applying for at the state level and how we can assist. I think keep in mind you can be creative. The corrective action plans in 114, when you get down to a point where it's time for the board to make other recommendations, that's the perfect time to really come forward and say, let's not yank the funding, but let's look at these creative ideas.
And let's see what they are doing with the money to kids.
I like that because it also supports prevention.
Yes.
To see an LEA like Davis who is putting counselors in all of their elementaries, we don't want to penalize them for their K-12 approach, right? And so that would be that's for you to decide if their plan and their actions.
Yeah, because talk prevention. That's a great point.
Right. Well, that would be on outcomes, right?
Well, I mean, also if you're getting them in the elementary. Well,
I had a couple.
Go ahead, Scott.
Just a couple of line item questions. On 301, I think there's a typo where it says program. Looks like it says or. Just needs to be deleted.
Hold on, what is that? 301?
301 program should be program means. There's something else in there.
Yes.
312 to 314, we've got the same URL issue that we talked about before. This one actually works, I think. It gets you to the right page. But I still think these are just, unless we're tied in and have to do it this way, we're going to be always out of compliance on this. People are going to click and it's not going to come up, and I think it's going to cause problems.
So that one works.
And that one did work. It got us right to the page, so I appreciate that. We did make the changes to 326 and 327 that we should know. I didn't understand, and I just need some help on the per student distribution, 357. So they get the WPU base for the first 400 students if they met these requirements, and then there's a per student distribution. How does that funding mechanism?
So the base is 20,000. So every school that is an approved program will get 20,000. And the reason behind the 400 to 1,200 is it helps rural schools, but it also doesn't penalize your larger urban school districts. And so they've played around with the funding allocation for many years, and they've actually come feedback from the LEAs, and this seems to be the best funding distribution to meet both standards.
Okay, so it maxes out at 1,200 plus the, okay.
So you're okay with how that's written?
Yeah, I just didn't understand.
And I did just, since this was up for review, I did get feedback from our LEAs on the funding distribution, and they all wanted to keep it as is.
Okay.
They did.
Then 443, 444, this is just again a question. An LEA may not use funds to supplant currently existing personnel or programs. So the funds can only be used to build, to add? What does that mean practically?
So if a new school counseling program comes on board and they've already purchased a school counselor, this new funds would not be to supplant the efforts they've already put in place. They would build their program and support the implementation of the program.
Okay. Is there any way we can measure that? As if money doesn't go into different buckets, right? It's just into the school and they do.
I think it's really important to remember Assistant Superintendent Nelson's comment about how the funds get spent and the allowable use of funds, that the funds are for the program. So if you go back to the allowable use of funds and how a new program would use funds, curriculum, that's very measurable. Did they have it before? Do they have it now? A clerk, did they have it before? Do they have it now? Professional development, they didn't get it last year, they're getting it this year. It is very measurable.
Okay.
Is that addressing your question?
That helps, yeah, I appreciate it. And then down here at the end, 455, 456, talking about the data and information they provide as requested by the superintendent. I hate to have the superintendent have to request all this stuff. Do we just have data that we need from these guys to support our monitoring? And can we just put that in the rule and say that you'll provide program data annually or something like that? Why do we have to pull it? Why can't it just be a push where they send it to us automatically?
Do you think send it automatically, or do you send a request for a report with specific items you need?
We have specific items that we need that they submit. Did you want me to give like an example of that? Like what data do we collect as far as accountability?
Sure, and then I think your question is, do we just put that list in versus say this job?
Oh, does it have to say request?
So my question, I think with the big school district LEAs, you probably get everything on some kind of a cycle, but we've got all these very small charter schools, and I don't know what your experience is here. In other areas, we don't get it, and then we try to get it, and then it's hard to get it because they don't have all of it. Is there
We haven't had any problems with accountability reporting as far as them understanding their deadlines and submitting. I almost wonder if we put it too prescriptive, would we not be able to change a requirement down the road? We may not want to require that as an accountability piece.
Could it just say that the LEA shall provide, well, it says as requested. This might be okay.
It's more general. It is a good point, but I like the flexibility that if we want to eliminate a requirement, we have that
and that
option.
request could be for it to come annually. You'll submit all this by whatever date every year.
Right.
So, okay. Thank you.
And just to let you know, the ratio plans for this year, they are due May 1st, so I won't be able to have a template in place for this year, but I promise I'll get something developed from here on out.
Sorry, just to follow up. So the data that we do get, would it include what was just talked about on new programs that came on, the use of funding?
Yes, so we do compliance checks through a review process, but what we collect annually for accountability measures is the counselors do a action research project to improve student outcomes. So we collect that. Any intent for a new school coming on board or to be an improved school counseling program, that's something that comes in. I'm trying to think of all my data collection because you guys caught me off guard. Let's see, the request for funding. So they do an RFF. So they outline what they spent this year, and then they do projections for next year, and then that's measured the following
So
year.
in the what they spent this year,
Right.
would show we bought
Yes.
curriculum with this money, we did this. But I think there's going to be a big spotlight on this going forward, and we should just be ready to say, here's the funding that we had, here's how it was spent. So if you're getting that level of detail, great.
We do. We get that in our
might
request.
aggregate that
Okay,
and
awesome.
include that in your board report next.
So
next year.
So we have a couple of things. The recommended action is that we approve the amendments for R277462, but we've made a few, which we can say those amendments as we go along with the amendments, or we can individually go through all of them. I can say them. Anyway, I'm just looking for a motion. Somebody talked about splitting it, but what are you guys comfortable with?
Okay, I'll make a motion that we repeal and reenact R277-462 as amended.
Okay, and as amended, shall I read the things that we added? Okay, and you guys suggested, and I think you wrote it down, Norley, 326 to 327, remove in conjunction.
In conjunction with accreditation.
Yeah, it's that. I think
that
yeah. I just
okay.
moved the thing. Add another letter E, 335 as part of the review, each school counseling program. We read that out loud. You have that one down. On line 382, after the meeting, add involving parents. Was that what you had suggested, Scott?
Yes.
In 301, take out the extra or. There was a typo. And I think that, did I miss any?
Could we, it's not I don't know about this URL issue, but after we investigate that, could we implement whatever change we make if we do make one?
Is it
to that?
Yeah, is it required to have the URL?
It is. It's required by the Office of Administrative Rules.
Not just the page, exact
It has to be
URL.
the exact URL and the edition. So that's why it states in there that it's the 2016 or whatever edition it is. You have to specify the edition. So every time you update the document, you have to also.
How do we track that within USB then to say that these are controlled documents, controlled by rules, so that when we update, we know that the rule has to, how do we do that? Right now we don't, because we just looked at the CTE one and it was off.
Correct. In all honesty, what has been done is when the rule is up for continuation or if it's being amended, that's when we check it.
And that means we've got a lot of unhappy people that are
Michelle has already said she's taking this on.
No, I
just tried. I just want to see if she's paying attention.
I am paying attention.
I know, I'm just teasing.
So I know we're in the middle of a motion, but I'd like to direct staff that we look at a way then, if we can't fix it in the rules, to implement something in USB to understand which URLs need to be locked, so that because they're part of the rule.
Consider it done. A quarterly review.
Okay, now back to the motion. Is there any discussion to the motion?
Jeff, is it?
Yeah, we have to do it from our end. We can't do it from administrative rules
Right.
end. It's going to have to be an internal staff change.
I
That
understand.
way,
So there'll be some
internal
system
staff
here.
updates their web page. They cannot let that URL be changed.
Maybe IT controls it or something. I don't know.
Okay, Lisa, discussion to the motion.
Is it appropriate to split it? And is it appropriate to postpone, I hate the word punishment, but the punishment part of it?
The corrective action.
The corrective action.
action. Thank you.
Now, my understanding is that when it comes back for us to look at, we get to decide whether or not that corrective action, how harsh it
Goes
is. Or,
into effect.
like,
Okay.
we can decide, we can look at extenuating circumstances, and it's like you said, we collect the data and say, this school is doing everything they can. This is where they're putting their money.
Right, so it's case by case.
We are not going to punish them.
That's going to provide us with all the
Yeah.
ammunition
So I
that
almost
needs to
think
go
it's
to
going
the
to be a
hill.
good thing.
Okay, so.
But we're not going to punish them if they're doing they're doing everything they can.
No, I agree.
Okay.
So, do we need to split it then?
I don't think we do, but I don't.
Looking for advice.
I don't think so.
You don't think so? Okay. All right.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for asking.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. Any other discussion? Okay. All those in favor of the motion to approve the amendments to R277, well, to repeal and reenact, including the amendments to R277462 Draft 1 on first reading, and Draft 2, sorry, and move to the board for approval on second and final reading.
As amended.
As amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee.
Oh, you guys are great.
No, you get me some takeaways too. So
Oh, okay, we have one more. Let's do this.
Oh, it's amazing.
Okay, action item 6.8, R277604, private school, homeschool, and Bureau of Indian Affairs, student participation in public school achievement tests. I think, Aaron, you're going to talk to us about this one. There were some parent issues with ACT, or anyway.
This is a rule that many of you probably didn't even know we had.
I didn't.
How we interact with privately enrolled schools and our students and students who aren't part of our K-12 system who want to participate in statewide assessment. That might seem shocking.
It is shocking.
Somebody wants to do that, right?
We see your face.
Earlier this year, we had so this has been kind of sitting in our drawer, this rule, for a while. And it's coming before us today just to update it. It's an example. Instead of a URL, this is an actual rule that we've neglected and things have gotten out of date. It came to our attention through a parent, though, in one of our larger LEAs here in Salt Lake County that wanted their student to take the ACT test. So you can see there's a dollar value assigned to that, right?
Many students that do that.
So wanted to take the ACT, showed up at this large district, and they were past the deadline. Got into kind of a conflict with this district. They contacted me, so then I started searching for the rule that governed that and found this. And we were able to resolve, the large district was able to resolve the issue with that parent separately, but it brought to our attention this rule was out of date. So Ben Rasmussen and I worked on trying to make sure that the citations now are up to date. Instead of the 53 A's, we've got the 53 G's and E's. And then also that on line 36 is where we start with, 34. It used to, the rule was written when we had a writing test, or actually when our state summative adaptive test went grades 3 through 12, they had listed in here. I don't know that it ever actually went through 12th grade.
It did.
11th grade we did. And so we updated that to say 3 through 8. That's the RISE test. The summative adaptive assessment is what's referenced in statute. The online writing assessment used to be grades 3 through 11. We're updating that to 5 and 8. That was a change that the board made about a year and a half ago. The high school assessment then is added for students who want to come in and participate in the Utah Aspire Plus. And then we also added, because as we looked at this acronym up on line 33, the Utah Performance Assessment System for students, UPass, is a term that you don't hear thrown around a lot. A few years ago, maybe half a decade ago, it was used regularly. But it references assessments that are part of the accountability system. And so now our accountability system is a little different than it was back then. The WIDA test is used because we give points in our system for EL progress and status. And so statewide English language proficiency assessment, which currently is the product is WIDA, is listed there on line 38. The college rating assessment is still there. And then the DIBELS, you guys have recognized it as the DIBELS, the third grade.
So do we need to change that as well? So now that it's like Acadians?
But we're not naming the, just like with the Aspire.
That's the reason I haven't named the test. I just pulled it out of the statute and I'm referencing what's called out in the statute.
Summative.
So that's
is UPass really still current?
No. I know, I couldn't believe that.
It actually it's still found in other places because when I met with Ben to see if we could strike that, we determined we couldn't because it's referenced in other places. So it's the umbrella that oversees the entire assessment system.
So it's not whereas I associate it with a specific test.
I hate to confess this, but your employees who work on assessment at the state level, when I send an email out on this, they're like, "What's UPass?"
I know.
Because it's just not used.
We haven't heard of it for years.
It's just not used that much.
Well, 4 or 5 years ago.
But it's still
Oh,
all the
longer
way
than
through
that.
the statute, all
Yeah.
the rules.
Yeah.
Because I did the same thing. I had
Yep.
to find where you defined it.
Yeah.
So do we need to send it back to you to clean it up, or
No, I think
just
We
pass it?
believe it's been cleaned up with Ben's work and mine, that it's as clean as we can get it. Now I would say, sitting with Mr. Hanson, I recognize there's no rule I can ever bring that you can't find.
I know.
You're very skilled at that.
He is very skilled at that. Improve it. Just kidding.
No, I just had one question on
Okay.
this one. On 70 and 71, I think there is probably one more code section. And it was a 53A reference that was still.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Looks like there was
I
one.
gotcha.
Yeah.
70, you did it.
Yeah.
So change 53A to 53G.
This is on line 73.
It's on line 70.
70 and it
Change
continues
53.
to 71.
And it would be changed 53A to 53G.
Well, that's already marked in here in the copy.
On line 70?
Oh,
No,
70.
it's missed. It's on
Gotcha.
73,
Yep.
but it's
Yeah,
missed
we
in
missed
70.
Got
missed one there.
You just did that just for Scott.
Yeah.
Are the rest of the numbers correct?
Scott, the rest
No,
of it.
I just saw you brought them all up to 53E, so I assumed they're all
Yeah,
correct. I didn't
that's
go in
clearly
and
an
click every one of
oversight
them.
there.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, awesome catch.
And then,
Any other questions?
well, so Bureau of Indian Affairs, we
Line
probably
15.
ought to, in 15, we probably ought to put BIA there if we're going to use BIA below that.
That's a good point.
Line 15.
15.
Yeah, but other than that,
Add
We use
BIA.
BIA in 91.
yeah. And you define it down below and say that that's BIA. That's all I saw on this one.
Anybody else have questions or concerns?
This is probably one of those rules that we get fixed and put it in the drawer, and that some future day
Yeah.
somebody stumbles on it
Yeah.
and says, "What is this?"
What is UPass?
They won't approve.
Well, this one,
That serves a purpose.
yeah, for sure. Well, we only have a couple of amendments, but we're looking for a motion to approve the amendments to R277604.
So I move that we adopt the revisions in R277604, private school, homeschool, and Bureau of Indian Affairs, student participation in public school achievement tests as amended.
Including from line 70 and line 15.
Okay.
You got that?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
And
And pass it on to the board for second and final approval.
So the motion before the committee is to approve the amendments to R277604 draft 2 on first reading, including amendments to line 70 and line 15. Any discussion to the motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes. Carries.
I'd like to propose a motion.
What would you like to propose?
Can we adjourn?
We can do whatever you want. I don't think we need a motion. Motion to adjourn.
Motion to
Thanks so
adjourn.
much for
Hey,
everybody's
you're even
input.
earlier.
I know. Go us. Thank you.
We're catching up on these 7 hours.
You know what? We're stuck in the same. We're still going forward. Oh, you know, our standards would have so many. Well, just say it.
If standards didn't have any such communication. Communication is
But I think the communication is what makes it like.
You wanted me back.
Oh no, Lisa, what are we gonna do without you?
At the end of the day.
Not necessarily.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.